A massive battle is unfolding in the kingdom of Grandis. Hundreds of knights are going on the attack. It takes place on the last line of defense of the Fortress of Endeavor. 3 of the squad are burning red in a fire, everything around them churning and collapsing. They just fall into the abyss. The knights are engaged in a bloody battle. This battle will go down in history. 2 horrible green orcs are trying to climb the wall of the fortress. A squad of knights tries to stop them, but they fail. The leader of the squad of knights shouts furiously for the soldiers to fight hard. He is agitating them to destroy all those orcs. There is fear and hatred in his eyes. The orcs speak an unknown language. They have huge fangs protruding from their mouths, their eyes glowing red. The bloodthirsty monsters are determined. Everything is burning with red flames and explosions are being emitted everywhere. One of the main orcs uses magic. A bright flash of purple light appears in front of his hands. The size of these orcs is gigantic. They are bigger than an ordinary man. In their huge paws, they have the simplest weapons, sharply sharpened axes and knives. The orcs are simply mad. On all their faces, read only lust for the death of the enemy. They shout loudly, making noises incomprehensible to the average person. The deputy commander of Fortress Endeavor, Filion Endeavor, looks worried. He is nervous and talks about the orcs falling into a berserk state. Standing behind the grandstand and watching the horror of it all, Filion says it's only a matter of time before the south gate falls. That's where it's headed. Not only that, the orcs are huge in number and have a powerful force. The main trouble comes when the Orc Lord enters the battle. The Orc Lord looks the most intimidating of all. He is different from the previous lords, for he is a master of aura. This Orc Lord can use special aura skills, making him different from all normal orcs. The deputy is watching through binoculars what is happening on the battlefield. The orcs have already taken the castle walls. Behind him are the guards. The orcs have already reached the stairs. They sneak forward and forward, not noticing the squad of knights in their way. Everything around them is ablaze. Inventor's squad watches in horror at what is happening. They shout to the other soldiers that no matter what, they need to defend the walls. The orc's huge green paw comes with such unthinkable force that nothing can be done anymore. An orc's leg would simply crush one of Inventor's knights beneath it. Orcs fear nothing. They don't even notice anyone under their feet. The surprised orc stands and watches as the soldier he just crushed rises from the dead. The soldier, lying on the ground, and his blood begins to slowly rise. His body is covered in blue flames. The dead are lying on the rocks. Suddenly, they all start to come to life and stand up. In the hands of one of the knights of Inventor's squad, an unusual ball of blue color can be seen. It is sparking. There is a blue shadow around, like a mist. The reviving knight is mercilessly crushed by one of the orcs with its huge clawed paws. But he, feeling no pain, is reborn again. The reborn knights take on a different appearance. They have glowing eyes and look like walking corpses. The orcs can't understand how this is even possible. The living soldiers of Inventor stand perplexed, with their mouths wide open. The revived knights turn into walking corpses. Their bodies are torn, congealed blood is visible from the wounds, and every muscle is visible. One of the rebel knights is all writhing and squirming. Suddenly he draws his sword and thrusts it straight into the throat of the terrified orc. The unthinkable is happening. The rebel soldiers have tremendous power. The orcs are amazed at what is happening. The squad begins to slash furiously with their swords at the orcs. One of the orcs shouts that a necromancer has appeared. The Orc Lord appears on the roof of the castle. He spins around, forming large blobs of fire and ash around him. Everything collapses and explodes into pieces. The aura of the Lork collapses everything in its path. A man in a black cloak appears. He forms purple circles around himself, from which lightning bolts of light emerge. This man is a necromancer. He holds a green orb in his hand. As expected of an aura master, he begins to summon his assistants. Scary monsters appear out of the purple haze. One with red hair and an evil face, and the other looks like some kind of beast with huge fangs. So also came to the rescue a creature with a head of which only the skull remained, all its muscles bare. He looks like a corpse. Now it's their turn. The green creatures and the rebel squad unite and go on the attack. The orc's huge aura swings a spiked bat. Compared to him, the squad and the green creatures seem so small and helpless. She swings the bat with all the force he's capable of. The spiked bat hits the ground. The spiked bat hits the ground with such force that all the opponents around it fly in different directions. The Orc Lord is wildly indignant and enraged. His eyes filled with blood, his jaws clenched to a squeak. There is a fight between an Orc Lord and a creature with a skull for a head. The creature attacks the orc with a lightsaber. The orc lord strikes the dead man with his axe. The dead man folds in half and cannot resist him any longer. Then a ravenous beast with a tail comes to his aid. He runs with inhuman speed. The beast grabs the orc, lifting him off the ground. He tries to resist it, but it fails. At this moment, the dead man is holding a sword and trying to stab the orc. An ugly smile can be seen on his face. A fight takes place between an orc lord and a ravenous beast with a tail. The latter has an advantage over the orc because of his inhuman speed. The beast with the tail clenched its mouth so that all its sharp teeth and huge fangs were visible. His gaze was filled with hatred, his eyes burning. Suddenly, he makes a circle of light with his paw. Those try to take cover, but the blow lands directly on the orc lord and he flies away. The orc lord squirmed in pain. The blow hit him right in the lower abdomen. The necromancer fights the orc angrily. With his sword, he chops off his arm, blood spurting from his mouth. A necromancer with such swordsmanship skills. A ravenous beast and a necromancer attack the enemy. They run at an unthinkable speed. A small creature that looks like a fairy appears. It has wings. Compared to the monsters, it is very small in size. No matter what the red-haired monster does, no matter where he is, a small creature with wings is everywhere flying above him, helping him. The monster with red hair swings his two arms fiercely to strike the ground again. His jaw is wide open, revealing all of his teeth. He once again hits the ground with tremendous force so that the opponents fly up and fly away. Everything around him burns and bursts into flames. On the battlefield, lying exhausted, they have no strength to fight any further. A small winged creature watches it all. This winged creature also has its own power. It emits black, haze-like streaks from itself, which has the same effect on the opponent. The orcs are simply shocked at what is happening. Their eyes show confusion, and they don't know how to proceed. The red-haired monster spins around, destroying everything in its path. Almost no one is left alive, all torn to shreds, blood everywhere. Everything is shrouded in black, haze-like streaks. There are red clots of blood everywhere. It's hard to make out what's going on here. The surviving soldiers who have been watching all of this are standing there, staring at what is happening. Their eyes and mouths are wide open, their pupils constricted. The deputy can't believe his eyes. He's amazed that the necromancer could single-handedly turn the tide of battle. An unperturbed, red-haired monster stands looking out over the field where everything was happening. A small winged creature sits on his shoulder. The orc lord, having lost faith in victory, utters words that he didn't expect mere corpses to be able to stop him. On the ground lies a creature with its limbs torn off, a horrified expression on its face, mouth open. The orc lord stands and looks at the monster with red hair and asks him about the fact that he doesn't think they're enough to overpower him, does he? The necromancer, watching the whole process, says it was amazing and that he finally found a decent body. A hand tries to grasp a sword assembled from bones. The necromancer continues to say that the one is worthy of being to become one of his comrades. You can see the anger and hatred in the necromancer's eyes as he swings his sword. A necromancer attacks an orc lord, and a fierce battle ensues between them. The necromancer possesses inhuman speed, a sharp sword in his hands. The orc lord begins to use his best skill, the aura skill. Behind him, his large aura appears, which repeats everything exactly after him. The aura he created around him clenches a fist that is several times larger than the necromancer and tries to strike him. The necromancer instantly tries to dodge this blow and begins to disintegrate. His arm begins to disintegrate into pieces. The orc is at a loss as to what he is doing. His gaze was fierce, his teeth clenched, his face wrinkled. The necromancer holds a sharp sword with a golden hilt. He tries to attack the orc, but the orc successfully defends himself. The orc's face shows a gloating smile. There are massive explosions. Everything is blazing. Everything is exploding. Everything is burning brightly. The orc lord has a huge axe in his hands and is chopping the bones of the dead with it. The orc lord grabs the skeleton of one of the monsters and chops it up with his axe. The necromancer tries to stop him, but he is powerless in this situation. Flashes of light blinding the eyes. Everything crumbles and shatters. The necromancer stands, and behind him is his army. Across from them stands an embittered orc. He has one hand clenched into a fist and is holding a weapon in the other. The necromancer's feet began to consume the bones that form from beneath the ground. Everything beneath him burns with purple flames and tries to consume. The necromancer's body is almost completely taken over by bones. Memories begin to flash in his mind, the faces of people dear to him. A dark-haired girl with big brown eyes stands and thinks about something. The girl with greenish hair squinted her eyes and immersed in her thoughts. You can see anger in the necromancer's eyes. He is seriously puzzled about something. His face is still covered, his hair slightly down over his eyes. Two girls, One with dark hair and long, the other with short blonde flashed in his mind. Friends of the young man who looks right at him flash his mind. A bearded, gray-haired man with a ponytail and muscular arms also arises in his mind. For the sake of those he cares for, here in this world, he applies protection on himself to defeat the enemy. His body becomes completely covered in skeleton. A monster with a skull instead of a head and a beast of prey stand and watch as if mesmerized. The red-haired monster with red eyes, who has a small, winged creature sitting on his shoulder, is also watching everything going on intently. The necromancer was completely covered in bones. A bony armor has formed on him. It covered his chest, arms, and legs. A steel sword can be seen in his hands. The orc lord stares dumbfounded at the necromancer. He was even more angry when he saw that the necromancer was wearing armor that protected him. The orc fiercely tells the necromancer to face him in battle for the last time to continue living as Andreas Cromwell. The necromancer starts swinging his sword with great speed. He is very determined with his hands clenched in tension. There is a violent fight between a necromancer and an orc lord. Everything goes up in flames. Those watching are in complete shock. The red-haired monster stands with his teeth clenched. A small winged creature sits on his shoulder, also watching. The necromancer's eyes are filled with rage and hatred. He has only one thing on his mind, that he wants to destroy the orc lord and defeat him. The orc lord applies his advantage skill. The necromancer tries to dodge this blow. Everything around him shatters and cracks. A bird's eye view of a beautiful gray building with a blue roof. At the front entrance is a large plaza. This is the Rodlin Academy. An antique clock sits against the wall. This Academy of the Empire is the most prestigious, where those recognized as promising come to study. Students are gathering in the hall. They are all those who are hiding their identities. They are wearing black cloaks with hoods. While the gathering is going on upstairs, a purple flash forms on the stairs downstairs in the basement. Andreas stands, cowering. You can see the fright in his eyes. Behind him, a blonde-haired man stands and calls his name. The man's name is Heron. The room looks like a morgue. There are tables everywhere with dead creatures lying on them. All the floors and walls in the room are stained with blood. Karen asks Andreas about where the body he worked with last week lies. He rebukes him for not being able to remember it. Two guys standing with their backs to each other. They're researchers of forbidden black magic, necromancers. If anyone finds out about this, Andreas will be executed on the spot. A red liquid that looks like blood pours from a large vessel with a narrow neck. Because of this, Andreas has to conduct his experiments in secret. He holds a vial from which a red liquid, similar to blood, pours out. There are signs depicted on the site. In the middle of the image lies a dead body. Heron and Andreas are preparing to perform some kind of magical ritual. Sharon is holding a skull in one hand, and from his other hand, a blue light that looks like smoke begins to emit and spread everywhere. Andreas has his eyes wide open, watching it all. A strange blue mist spread across the room. The dead body that was just lying in the middle of the platform begins to rise. It is engulfed in blue light. Behind him, Andreas is watching. The revived corpse begins to decompose and screams loudly. It withers and squirms. Another magical practice has failed. Charon instructs him to clean this place up and go upstairs. The body that had been ritualized was just a skeleton. The room is shrouded in darkness. Only the dim light from the torch on the wall makes it possible to see anything in the darkness. The mop rag had completely absorbed the blood. It's now a crimson color. He's trying to clean up the blood with a mop. He reasoned that even though it was dangerous, he felt he was getting a lot out of it. There are mysterious books on the shelves. They look frightening. Some of them have skulls on them. Some have strange drawings. Taking the golden book, Andreas reasons that this is the only place where he can read decent books about black magic. He walks back up to the room where the blonde-haired man is and apologizes for being long. Sitting at a huge table is Karen. He asks Andreas about the fact that if he has half the day to clean, how is he going to do all the work himself? Heron looks at Andreas sternly. He talks about the fact that he trusted him with a simple job and he is so worked up. His face frowned. He says he won't tolerate another one of his failures. Andreas looks at him and says that he will do his best and will try his best. Rising from his chair, Heron tells him to go to Binhalas National Cemetery and bring him another body, and he gives him another chance. The second tier of the room is enclosed by a partition. Karen reminds Andreas that he accepted him into the academy, despite the fact that he is an orphan. Heron, with a serious face, goes on to say that Andreas must constantly prove that he is worthy of life. Andreas realizes that he's just going to be another body for his experiments. He wouldn't like that very much. Walking over to the closet, the man finishes his speech and tells him not to let him down and tells him to leave. Andreas folds his arms guiltily. As he leaves the office, Andreas thinks about the fact that Karen didn't even cover his travel expenses. The students are crowded around the door, all looking at him. Andreas guesses why everyone is staring at him like that. He starts to get angry. The students look at him in amazement, while marveling at how and why he is still here. Andreas angrily pushes everyone away and hurries to get away faster. He yells at them that this is not a show and for them all to get out of his way. He is furious. The students look after him. Andreas Kronwall is a student in the magic department. He is in his junior year. He is not endowed with any talents. An old, shabby gray building comes into view. It is dreary and gloomy. Andreas is holding on tight to someone's leg and begging to be left at the academy. He's the academy's worst-ranked third-rate villain. Andreas tearfully begs to be given a chance to continue his studies, but even though he doesn't want to, he has to continue living as Andreas. A disc with a game called The Great Sin. Makoto Kaneshiro inside the world of the game plays as a character named Andreas. A stone-faced Makoto Kaneshiro stands in the background of the city. He is a special forces officer who has been unable to adapt to normal life in society. This same man, but now all overgrown and having lost the meaning of life, believes that the only thing that keeps him going is the game The Great Sin. Makoto Kaneshiro sits behind his computer screen. He looks like a zombified man. He finally managed to get through this game in week 12. Suddenly the phone rings. He picks up the phone. Someone with detailed knowledge of his personal information and gambling habits is calling him. He is very surprised by this call. He quickly tries to immediately turn off the computer by pressing the button on the system unit. On the screen appears the caption, Game Character, Makoto Kaneshiro, Andreas Cromwell. He became a playable character 6 months before the main story began. The character Andreas, played by Makoto Kaneshiro, opens his mouth and screams in terror. He is a character who is always followed by the shadow of death. The main characters of the game look intimidating and determined. Among them are 2 guys and 2 girls. They find out the real identity of Heron and kill him. A black creature in female form with blonde hair and bright eyes looks very scary. It forms golden stripes around itself. Andreas is in the large hands of Karen. He realizes that if he doesn't find a way to escape him, he won't be able to avoid becoming involved in the events. Andreas stands wide-eyed, a look of fright in his eyes. Behind him are some scary monsters. It's a sunny day. Classes are in progress at the academy. Some of the students are already going home, some are just going to study. Andreas is sitting on a bench in the park, musing about something. He realizes that he has no choice but to become stronger before everything starts. He realizes that the only thing he can count on is the 2 special features he'll get when he plays for 13 weeks. Andreas gets up from the bench. One of those skills got the Dual Essence trait, which allows you to use both magic and ball possession. In Andreas's mind, an image of a beautiful golden sword arises that has a powerful force and can help him. He walks down a path in the park and reasons that he can't survive by focusing on just one of these skills. He needs to possess both. Looking at the hand on which the ring glistens, he realizes that he has no choice of the skill that will best enhance his necromancy. He clenches his fist with all his might and tries to calm himself down and set himself up for everything to be okay. An electronic scoreboard appears in front of Andreas's face with a selection of characteristics. He looks at the electronic scoreboard and realizes that this is the first time he's seeing this skill set, and there's really an informed choice to be made here. Andreas learns each skill and tries to apply it on himself. He realizes that the way of weapons, the king of beasts, is definitely not suitable for him. He realizes that the choice needs to be approached thoroughly and decides for himself that he will start by looking at skills he hasn't seen before. Then he notices one of the skills that catches his attention. He starts to wonder what it means. He whispers the word, evolution. It was the skill that most interested him. Evolution is the phenomenon of adaptation of a living being to reach higher places. A fish gradually evolves into a more evolved creature. Andreas, realizing that this is a trait he's never seen in a game before, suggests it's something he really needs right now. He realizes that this skill is exactly what he needs right now. He selects this skill with a confident movement of the finger of his left hand and presses the screen. Standing in front of the academy on the scoreboard in front of his face, the message, "The line has been chosen," pops up. There is no turning back. The electronic board in front of his face gradually dissolves and disappears. Andreas is dressed in a black robe, a long, sharp sword at his belt. His face became unrecognizable. His eyes filled with anger and turned red. Andreas finally sees what kind of future this trait will bring him. Pictures arise in his mind, images of terrifying monsters. A terrifying creature with the face of a bony ram instead of a face, with flames coming out of its head. It has a hideous, scary look. On his head is a crown with ruby stones. After gaining the evolution skill in this world, he will definitely survive and pass this game as the character Andreas. Rodland Academy provides free housing for its students in a dormitory called Maple Leaf. Andreas sits in his room on the edge of his bed. He's a very minor villain in this game, but in this reality, he really was completely powerless. Andreas stands up in his bed, holding himself up so he doesn't fall over. He realizes that his only immediate asset is his necromancy. He thinks about going into the explorer's room in the dungeon before heading to the graveyard. From the back of the chair, he takes his black cloak and rather hurries to depart, for he cannot waste time. It's a sunny day. Clouds are floating in the bright sky. There is not a single cloud. As he walks outside of the dorm, he stops and thinks about how he needs to get stronger as soon as possible. It's not just for the main event. An image of other creatures appears in his mind. He realizes that there are countless characters other than Karen in the game that could kill him. The entrance to the explorer's room in the dungeon is a huge, massive, gate-like door. Andreas enters the explorer's room in the dungeon and walks over to a rack of books. He goes through the books and is horrified by their strange titles. Throwing a glance at the cage behind him, he realizes that there is something else in this room right now that could kill him just as quickly. An exhausted girl with red hair sits in a cage. She is almost completely naked. The girl doesn't even look in his direction. Her eyes are cast downward. Andreas suggests that she definitely looks a lot like a vampire. Andreas speculates that the vampires in this game are invulnerable to sunlight and are creatures capable of wielding powerful magic. Heron realizes with anger that this girl is not the type of creature he could get with ease. He picks up one of the books from the top shelf of the rack. He thinks about it being the equivalent of a boss in the middle of a game. Someone behind him calls out to him. He turns to the girl sitting behind the bars and looks her straight in the eye. She's trying to get up. Her eyes are red, and she has a sly, intent look. She asks Andreas to help her get out of here. An old train rushes at high speed in total darkness, bright headlights illuminating its path. Andreas, wearing a hood over his head, sits in a train seat and muses that the vampiress's offer was very tempting. Smiling slightly, he suggests that perhaps it was a gift from above. He remembers the sly face of the vampire girl, what she tells him about how if he lets her out, she will kill Karen. Hearing this, Andreas fell silent. It was expected of the vampiress to see the truth through his concerns of Karen. The serious look on the red-haired girl's face suggested that she was eagerly waiting for him to respond to her proposal. Andreas suggests that there is no guarantee that she will let him go. The girl swears to him that she will not kill him. Her sly look gives away her nature. She is definitely lying. She repeats again that she is telling the truth and swears again. A look at her face convinces him that she is definitely lying to him. He says he will think about her proposal. Andreas looked at the canister of liquid that looked very much like blood. At that moment, the girl shouts to him that there is no time to think about it. Back in reality from his memories, he rides on a train that takes him somewhere fast. He decides to try to learn more about vampires. Outside the train window, it is slowly getting darker. Bright stars appear in the sky. The wheels of the train begin to slow down with a rattle and soon come to a stop. Andreas arrived at the National Cemetery, as Caron had told him to. Andreas is approaching the gate of the cemetery. He is breathing heavily. In his hand, he holds a huge wheeled suitcase, which he rolls behind him. Andreas concludes that he needs to invest in physical development first. He is very tired of dragging such a huge suitcase behind him. He approached the gates of the National Cemetery. This is where black magicians collect bodies for their needs. As he gets close to the gate, he informs someone standing inside the cemetery that he has come from Jenny's house, that he is her third grandson. A worker inside the cemetery outside the gate asks him if he has brought flowers. Andreas replies that he has brought 13 azure irises. The employee stands and waits for him to come in. Andreas realizes that he had a poor idea of the password. It's a good thing he wasn't confused. Walking deep into the cemetery, Andreas sees a man warming up after digging a grave. Behind him, on the ground, lies an excavated red coffin. Upon seeing Andreas, the man smiles at him and is happy that he has finally arrived. He says that Andreas has arrived on time. In a coffin lies the corpse of a man holding a large golden sword. The red-haired man presents him with the corpse of a knight. Pleased with what he sees, Andreas briefly thanks him. Andreas pulls the corpse out of the coffin and drags it behind him, while shouting that it is very heavy. He struggles to drag it on his back. Andreas packs the knight's corpse into his large suitcase. He realizes that he has to go now before it is too late. He was about to leave when he happened to glance at one of the graves and stopped. It was a huge and spectacular metal grave with a large cross. 3 burnt candles and a single withered bouquet of flowers are placed in front of it. Not believing his eyes, he feels that he has seen that name on a gravestone somewhere. He realizes that this is the grave of Swordmaster Nickel Lifehill. A huge waterfall whips by. The man who stands in front of the waterfall has spent decades in isolation, practicing following the path of the ball. A gray-haired man with a disheveled head of hair and a beard is very much puzzled about something. He is completely immersed in his thoughts. The man looks unkempt. His clothes are ragged. He's waving his sword. In this way, he is practicing and watching the sword's movement. Suddenly, he loses his strength and falls to the ground. He sees this branching tree in front of him. The sun's rays blind his eyes. This man dedicated decades of his life to the sword and became master of aura. The last thing he sees in front of him is falling leaves right on top of him and bright sunlight. At this point, he dies of old age. This fact is one of the Easter eggs in this game. The character Andreas never realized why the game makers added this post here. Andreas stands and looks at the man who provided him with the corpse. The man is burying the hole that was Master Aura's grave. Andreas introduces the Death Knight he created from the body of Master Aura. He will be on a large black horse that is completely covered in armor. He presents such a picture. The creature that Heron created simply disintegrates into bones. Heron realizes he can't create a high-ranking one. Andreas is standing. A suitcase with a corpse is standing next to him. He keeps thinking that after his evolution, the situation will take a different turn. He sighs deeply and looks down at his feet. He thinks to himself that he definitely needs a body with good latent abilities. Andreas calls out to a man named Raymond. Before Andreas can even tell him what he wants, the man flatly refuses. Angry, the man drops the shovel, leaving the hole unburied. An enraged Raymond looks at Andreas and tells him to get Karen's permission first, and that he should think about what position he is putting Raymond in. Confused, Andreas can't get anything out of himself and just mumbled something. Unable to think of anything better, he offers his gold ring in exchange for a new body. The dumbfounded man stands and stares at him. Raymond stares at the shimmering ring in disbelief. It's a ring engraved with the Count's coat of arms. If he sells it, he could make a fortune. Utterly desperate, Andreas explains to him that he has nothing but his old ring, and as a magician, results are more important to him than anything else. Andreas convinces Raymond to keep it from Karen. He puts the ring directly into his palm. He agrees to the deal. Andreas was very happy that the man finally agreed, despite the fact that it was the ring of a fallen noble house. It was impossible to resist. The full moon illuminates the entire cemetery. Andreas suggests he dig up the second corpse where the Master of Aura rests. Andreas looks into the coffin and sees an elderly gray-haired man lying in it. As he closes the lid of the coffin, he thinks about his future that he saw yesterday and dreams that it will finally begin. Behind him, a bony monster emerges from the flames of the fire. He looks terribly frightening. He is holding a sharp sword, his eyes glowing red. Karen looks appraisingly at the body of the knight that Andreas has retrieved from the graveyard and says that it is a suitable body for their upcoming ritual. As he leaves, Heron tells Andreas that he will be responsible for the aftercare. Andreas carefully works the knight's naked body with a rag, washing it. At this point, he indignantly thinks to himself that he has only just returned and Karen has already loaded him down with work. Carefully working his body with the rag, Andreas reassures himself that he works better when he's irritated. Maybe it's a bodily memory. A little tired, he touches his head with his hand and realizes he needs to get this over with quickly so he can start exercising sooner. Andreas starts mopping the floor. He gives the traces of blood from the pad a good scrubbing. Above him hangs the suspended body of a corpse. Andreas thinks about the fact that he has a second corpse hiding in his suitcase. It's the body of Master Aura Nickel. Having almost scrubbed the pad, he thinks about what's ahead of him. At this level he's at, a skeleton is the best he can work with. Andreas imagines standing next to the active skill selection table and choosing necromancy. He realizes he has no money, so he can't practice on another body yet. The clanking of the rings of the black metal chain can be heard. They're tight. Completely absorbed in his thoughts, he continues scrubbing the floors. He hears a voice calling him, asking how long he has to wait. Andreas realizes it's a vampire girl who is behind bars. Turning to face the grate, he stares at her. He has a mop in his hands. He asks her if she has slept. She looks disgusted and reminds him that she told him she wouldn't kill him. She urges him to let her out immediately. He takes confident steps in her direction, approaching the grate. As he gets close to the bars, he sees that the girl's hands are bounded by metal chains with shackles. She is down on her knees. She has a sly look on her face. Her eyes are bloodshot. She feels hopeful that he will help her escape. He recalls Karen's face and thinks about how he was even able to tie her up and lock her behind bars. He has a book in his right hand. He tells her that when he read this book, he found the answer to his question. The exasperated vampire girl asked him what was wrong and why he was standing silently staring at her. She got up from her knees and started to walk over to the grate, asking him why he was still hesitating. She began to move away from the bars while telling him to make a decision as soon as possible, otherwise she would probably kill him after all. Then she suddenly hears the phrase that he is ready to let her out. Her eyes filled with hope and faith. She was glad to be free at last. She turns around and looks at him. Andreas says he can't take it anymore and licks Heron. Overjoyed, the girl believed that everything would be as she had planned. She asks to be taken off her shackles sooner rather than later. But then she heard that she had to swear on her family's name. Her eyes look frightened. She doesn't know the right thing to do. Andreas talks about how she must swear on her family's name and promise that she won't kill him when he releases her. After his words, her hands shook and almost clenched into a fist. He realizes that, judging from her reaction, the contents of the book are true. He looks at her carefully and remembers that the book says that vampires, when they swear on the name of their family, cannot break the oath. His eyes rounded. He hadn't expected her to agree to this. Without a second thought, she says she swears on Lucifer's name. Andreas gets very close to the grid and wonders if it's really that simple. An electronic scoreboard suddenly appears in front of his face. Condition met. A specimen capable of evolution has been discovered. Angela Lucifer has a 55% chance of successful evolution. A vampire girl named Angela Lucifer looks at him in surprise, and she doesn't see the electronic scoreboard and doesn't understand where he's pointing his finger. Andreas is outraged that so easily her evolution rate has increased by such a large percentage. He is given the choice of triggering the evolution process. Andreas ponders, his hand held at his chin. He realizes that this is his chance to test the trait before using it on Nickel. He warns the girl that if something goes wrong, it will not be his fault. She doesn't understand what he means. Angrily, she realizes that he is just tricking her. Out of anger, she rocks. On the electronic scoreboard, Andrea presses the yes button. This means that he has decided to start the process of Angela Lucifer's evolution. Suddenly, the vampire girl's red eyes fill with hatred and rage. She becomes terrified and no longer resembles herself. She holds her head and moans loudly. Something inexplicable happens to her. Glowing, multicolored rings form around her. Andreas watches in horror. She screams and moans. Drops of sweat come to her face. Tears are streaming from her eyes and drooling from her mouth, and the veins on her forehead are swollen. She looks awful, as if someone unknown has taken up residence in her. The girl is screaming, and foam is coming out of her mouth. She's wriggling and squirming all over. Watching the goings-on behind bars, Andreas is dumbfounded, unable to understand what's going on here. After this attack, the girl just falls to the ground and stops moving. Andreas tries to call out to her and tells her to get up. The stone staircase that leads to the basement is illuminated by a dim light. Andreas learns something new about this feature of evolution. On the couch lies the body of Aura Master Nickel. Andreas carefully treats his body with a cloth. Laying his body on the ritual pad, he holds the bowl in his hands and thinks about how it would be okay if he summoned him right now. Andreas proceeds to perform the ritual. His face is determined. Some kind of black powder is visible in his hand. In his hands, a hovering rune forms from the powder and emits clots of blue light. He begins to summon the skeleton. Right now, a basic necromancy called skeleton summoning has been activated, one body detected. Andreas looks on, holding a glowing rune in his hands. His eyes are wide with amazement. He realizes that there is no turning back. He exerts a tremendous amount of effort, but for some reason, his body does not rise. He does not immediately realize what is happening here and continues his ritual. He is amazed that it takes that much mana to just lift a single skeleton. The corpse's skin slowly begins to peel off the body. The bones begin to show. A small amount of time passes, and only a skeleton remains of the body, leaving bare bones. The skeleton tries to get to his feet. A glowing ray of blue light burns around him. Andreas looks at everything that is happening with his mouth wide open. An electronic scoreboard appears, announcing that Andreas has successfully completed the skeleton summoning. His necromancy level is increased from 1 to 3. The skeleton tries to get to his feet. A glowing ray of blue light burns around him. Andreas looks at everything that is happening with his mouth wide open. The electronic scoreboard that appeared in front of Andreas reports that the corpse's level is transcendent. He could gain some self-awareness from his past. The skeleton is fully recovered. He stands confidently on the pad and is all crispy. It's like he's smiling. This skeleton is a warrior. He has special traits of self-awareness, and his main skill is the sword. Skeletal mastery is a state of being at the peak of the highest stage of professionalism. Andreas stares at the skeleton in amazement and questions him about whether he was really the master of aura when he was alive. The skeleton begins to make some sort of incomprehensible gesture with the index fingers of one hand. Watching his finger, he asks him the question, does he assure himself to Andreas? The skeleton, with a confident look, makes the kind of gesture that means okay. It means that the skeleton trusts Andreas completely. Andreas smirks, a snide expression on his face. He's already imagining what's going to happen next. Andreas sits in his room on a chair with his feet up on the table, his face filled with humility and joy. He is anticipating further success. He's looking at some notes on his wall. It's a calendar. He realizes that there is still about a year left before Karen dies. Sitting at his desk, an electronic scoreboard appears in front of him. Studying it, he concludes that if he wants to survive, he has a lot to do. An inscription that characterized his main traits came out on the electronic scoreboard. Even if one didn't use summoning skills, their quality was still increasing. Andreas hears a rumble behind him in the room. He rises from his chair. He brings up an electronic scoreboard that gives him the choice of calling on one warrior skeleton. He chooses an option and presses the yes button. Just then, Nickel's skeleton emerges from the blue hallway. He tells him to come into the room. The skeleton's bones crunch. Andreas realizes that it will be bad if anyone sees him. He makes a decision to get dressed as soon as possible. The dormitory provided by Rodland Academy is covered in sunlight. It's a beautiful summer day. Andreas dresses the skeleton in robes. He is wearing a long hooded cloak jacket, dark gloves, long boots, and a maroon scarf around his neck. After looking at what Nickel's skeleton looks like, he talks about how no matter how you look at it, it now looks like a human. The clothed skeleton begins to demonstrate his abilities. He holds a sword. He wields it skillfully. Andreas looks at him satisfactorily. He makes sure that what was written in the clues from the creators of the game is true. He really is a master of his craft. Even though he died while practicing, he still practiced despite being dead. It's amazing. On Andreas's face, a smile can be seen on his lips. He realizes that this plus for him anyway. Andreas clenches his fist. He realizes that he's finally found the ability to develop his not-so-good trait. Master Aura's skeleton is still practicing hard. Andreas calls out to him. Stopping his action, the skeleton looks at him questioningly. Andreas asks to be taught how to wield a sword the way he does. An information scroll for Andreas comes out on the electronic scoreboard. It says that in the world of great sin, talent and rank are important factors. The skeleton is trying to teach Andreas the proper moves. Andreas is holding a stick instead of a sword, just in case he gets hurt. As he makes the movements, as he swings his sword, drops of sweat come to Andreas's face. He feels as if his muscles are on fire. An image of the creatures arises in his mind. He feels envy, but is pleased that Nickel is teaching him how to achieve a body like those creatures. He imagines himself as a jock. If Nickel teaches him what he himself is perfectly capable of, he will be able to use that aura in the future. Andreas mentally imagines a blue light burning in his ribcage and a red light burning in his lower abdomen. He feels that he will be able to walk the path of a swordsman mage. He is well aware that development will be difficult for him, but if he can handle the initial phase, he will become stronger than anyone. Andreas is completely immersed in his fantasy. Suddenly, someone pinches his arm. Andreas smiles and chuckles. It was unexpected. It tickled him. He sees that it was the skeleton that pinched him. With a nonchalant look, the skeleton tells him to concentrate, and still makes the strange gesture of rotating the index finger of his left hand. Smiling slightly, Andreas asks him about how he can squeeze his hand so hard when he's just a pile of bones. Putting a hand on his shoulder and squeaking slightly, he explains to him that he was special forces when he was alive, that physical training is not a challenge for him. Nickel remembers himself as he was when he was alive. He was special forces. All the action takes place in the dormitory of Roland Academy in Andreas's room. Andreas is sitting at the table. Since he let Nickel out today and didn't go to class, how much his necromancy level has increased. Holding a mug in his hand, Andreas calls up the electronic scoreboard to familiarize himself with his information. Andreas clicks on the electronic scoreboard screen and sees that in about 5 hours, his necromancy level has risen by 2 units. 200 hours are required to advance to the beginner level. After reaching the beginner stage, progress should become much slower. Suddenly he realizes that Karen hasn't summoned him to his side in quite some time. Andreas imagines in his head a vampire woman behind bars. He realizes that completing evolution takes a lot of time, so it's okay. Andreas focuses on the idea that completing evolution takes a large amount of time, so I guess it's okay. Suddenly, someone abruptly interrupts his train of thought. He turns around indignantly. It's the sound of sword swinging that keeps him from concentrating. In front of him stands the skeleton Nickel, who still continues to swing his sword. His training doesn't stop for a second. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, Andreas turns to the skeleton and says that he realizes that the skeleton is not tired since it is inanimate and calls it something. He begins to fantasize that if he had potions, he could train and heal himself indefinitely. Healing Potion heals internal injuries and removes fatigue. Generation Potion heals external wounds and speeds up recovery. This is where he thinks about brewing them himself. He understands what ingredients are needed, but he doesn't know their specific ratios. Andreas gets up from the table, taking his robes from the back of the chair. He needs to attend a few classes and replenish his knowledge of potions. Andreas is determined to go to Roland's academy. It's a majestic building with a dome. Opening the door, he stands on the threshold and looks to see that there aren't many people in class. The room is practically empty. Opening the door, he stands on the threshold and looks to see that there aren't many people in class. The room is practically empty. The two sitting at the desk are discussing why Andreas came to the potions class. They say that he wants to attract girls that way. The quiet hum of the students' discussion can be heard. They say that Andreas's family is already at the bottom anyway. Andreas tries to ignore them. He realizes it's easier for him to keep quiet. He's not here to attract attention. His expression becomes angry. He is very unhappy that everyone thinks of him that way. He's going to show everyone what he can do. As Andreas walks up the steps to his seat, a blonde-haired girl from another row watches him. The girl sighs heavily as she looks at Andreas, emitting a stream of air from her mouth. Outside the lecture hall door, the instructor can be heard loudly asking the students for silence to form. From a bird's-eye view, the academy looks majestic and very beautiful. A medical herbalism class is in progress. Andreas concludes that what is happening so far is not too different from what happened in the game. Tired of listening to what the professor is telling him, Andreas wishes he would hurry up and get to the mixing proportions. The professor says the next thing they'll talk about will be a method for creating physical enhancement potions. Running a pointer across the board, the professor reminds us that this potion is based on macaima leaves and 3 other ingredients. He's angry over the fact that even though this is an intermediate level course, the professor is teaching them a potion that has so many side effects. Andreas rises and raises his hand, asking the professor to ask a question. He allows him to do so. Andreas asks him why he doesn't add hampis extract and matarata root. The professor looks at him dumbfounded through his glasses. The blonde-haired girl sitting at the desk a little farther away from him looks at Andreas in surprise and can't believe her ears. Andreas leans confidently on his desk. Everyone stares at him in surprise, not hiding their irritation. But Andreas is sure he's not wrong. He tells Andreas that if he wants to put them in there, he can just boil the soup. This is when all the students start laughing out loud. But Andreas knows for a fact that everything he just listed are the ingredients needed to create a physical enhancement potion. Andreas suggests that perhaps this recipe hasn't been discovered yet. The students behind his back chuckle gloatingly at him. The bell rings to announce the end of the class. Everyone gets up from their seats. Andreas realizes that his knowledge was better than what he had just learned. Andreas thinks about the fact that maybe he'd be better off practicing on his own after all. He realized from the beginning that it was a fool's errand to expect anything. He hangs his bag on his shoulder and walks away from the study hall. A blonde girl follows him. She stares after him, wanting something, but afraid to call out to him. She's thinking about something, her narrowed lips pressed together. The large corridor of the research department at the academy comes into view. The corridor is very gloomy. Only the dim light of a lantern illuminates it. Andreas sits down and decides to create a potion on his own. There are many chemical vials and substances on the table where he is working. After mixing a few ingredients, an electronic board forms in front of his face, saying that the creation of the potion failed. What a shame. This girl who was standing behind him in the hallway is one of the playable characters who is a genius in potions. This character's name is Lucia Everlast. She looks very nice. She shouldn't be close to Andreas, so why is she here? The girl enters the room where Andreas is trying to brew a potion. She tells him that he has failed many times. Andreas pays no attention to her. Lucia asks him with interest what he is experimenting on. She peers into his face. He, without opening his eyes, answers her that it is a secret. Without turning his face, he continues to tell her that he went to class and didn't take away any knowledge, but the number of his problems were increasing. Andreas is writing something down in his notebook. The girl looks at him and remains silent. The room is dead silent and tense. Slightly offended and folding her arms across her chest, the girl tells him that he is truthfully embittered. Andreas is already tired of her presence. Andreas turns slightly in her direction. Lucius tells him that she didn't think he was the kind of person who would be the first to suggest something. Here, she angrily and suddenly slams her slender palm on the table. She walks close to the table and asks him if he would like to do research together. Lucia enigmatically looks right into his eyes while she asks him a question about, "Isn't that a great idea?" Andreas realizes that there is no need for him to refuse, but continues to further pad his price. Making a nonchalant expression on his face, he looks at her and asks her what she wants from him. The girl sadly asks him about the fact that is it weird that she wants a research partner? Andreas indifferently replies that it won't do her any good. Smiling sincerely, Lucia replies to him that it will be enough for her to receive his thanks. She suggests that he has talent and could create astounding things, and she aspires to a medicine that does not yet exist in this world. He stares at her mesmerized and thinks to himself that he just wanted to brew a potion for himself. A pale Lucia lies in bed. A woman sits on her knees. Next to her stands Karen. If she doesn't find a cure for her illness, she will one day die because of it. In the research room, she's trying to create a substance for herself that can cure her. Even the most famous doctors can't help her. Lucia is sitting at her desk, gloves on her hands and a test tube in her hand. This disease is very serious and was given to her by the system itself. She realizes that only someone like her can help her find a cure. She doesn't know the exact ratio of ingredients to create the cure. She creates potions to kill creatures. She's a true master potion maker, and for her to meet someone as clever as she is a great stroke of luck. Andreas sits at the table, still waiting for her to finally go and leave her alone. The girl does not give up and stares intently into his eyes. Andreas is trying to keep himself safe. He realizes that if he carelessly allows himself to become entangled with her, his life will only become shorter. The girl doesn't know what to get him interested in, so that he finally agrees and gives out the phrase, "peony mushroom." Andreas lowered his head, trying to hide his surprise. He realized at once what she meant. She tells him that they are also required to create the potion. She knows the basic ingredients that no one but him was supposed to know. Lucius points to the vial in which the potion is brewing. She asks him if he couldn't make this potion by adding peony mushroom to it. The atmosphere in the office is tense. Lucy says that she intuitively knows about it, and if he wants, she can help him earn money. A confused Andreas replies to her that she only says that because she's rich, and once she assures what she came for, she'll have to leave. Lucia heads for the exit. She opens the door and says one last thing to Andreas, giving him time to think about her proposal. The office door closes. Andreas is sure he doesn't need to think about it. He's already made up his mind. He is holding a stick and practicing swinging his sword. He has nothing to worry about if he accepts the girl's proposal, but there is a very big risk. Andreas diligently tries to repeat the motions after Nickel, but at this point his head is filled with the fact that he can pick his own proportions for the potion. He makes a move and takes a swing. He figured he'd have to get some money from somewhere first. He makes a decisive swing of his sword. He has a puzzled look on his face. He wonders if he has any good ideas about how to make a lot of money quickly. Andreas believes that he will definitely succeed and become as powerful a swordmaster as his teacher Nickel. He looks fearfully at Nickel and tells him that he does know when. The latter is distracted. Andreas tries to focus on the training session, putting aside thoughts of money. He decides that afterwards, he will have more time to think about it. While practicing, Andreas notices a table of test tubes with a letter on it. This might be a good idea. He reasons that his only idea is to ask for money from his sister, who has sent him a letter saying she misses him very much. He feels worthless. He realizes that this is the only way he has ever made money without much effort. Andreas is walking through the park. He realizes that no matter how helpless he is, this is not the way out. And he swears to himself that this is definitely the last time. From the balcony, a black-haired girl watches him with interest. She stares after him wide-eyed. She can't believe it's Andreas Cromwell coming. Andreas walks with a confident look. He is completely focused on his goal. In his hands, he holds a magic book. The black-haired girl watching him thinks to herself that even if he has changed, there is no way to change his horrible personality. She is sitting by the fountain with a book in her hands. There are students walking around, all busy with their work. Andreas walks among them. The black-haired girl's name is Diane Alwyn. She is the perfect magus. This young lady is from the Alwyn family. In Andreas's mind, memories arise of how well they got along when they were kids. But because of the Cromwell family's debts, they stopped communicating. Andreas is starting to feel sad about his memories. He's done enough bad things since then. A cat-like girl with bright yellow glass eyes and long fangs tries to grab him with her paw. The cat-like girl grabs him with her clawed paws. He has a resigned look on his face. Thinking about the black-haired girl, he realizes that there is no point in even approaching her. He decides to ask his younger sister for money. A shining building graces the square. The city is the capital of Rodlin. 3 full moons brightly illuminate the entire space, making everything look magical. Andreas pulls the hood of his cloak over his head and searches for the place he wants and realizes it must be here somewhere. He's getting close. He sees a very beautiful restaurant with golden facades that is very respectable looking. He walks into a restaurant. It is full of men in suits and dressed up women. Andreas notices his sister at one of the tables. His sister talks about how she has sent so many letters, but he hasn't answered any of them. They sit across from each other. The girl looks at her brother with love and respect. She says it is not like him to say such words. Her name is Emmy Cromwell. Andreas makes a pitiful appearance looking down. In his hands is his mug. His sister is worried about him. Covering her mouth slightly with her lips to hide her smile, she questions the serious look on his face. She guesses that he needs money again. Without waiting for an answer, she hands him an envelope with the money she had prepared in advance. At the same time, she tells him not to spend it thoughtlessly. Andreas accepts the envelope and thanks his sister for everything. He promises to be sure to return them to Emmy. Looking at her brother's hand, the girl's eyes go wide with amazement. She asks him about his engraved ring. Andreas was startled and couldn't think of anything better to say than that he'd taken it off so he wouldn't lose it. The girl hopes he cares about the ring and has definitely put it away so he doesn't lose it. Andreas realizes that he can't tell her the truth so as not to upset her. But she has a frightened expression that gives him away. The girl talks desperately about how whatever happened, he shouldn't have. Emmy doesn't have time to finish the sentence before Andreas lowers his head and starts apologizing to her. Emmy jumps up indignantly. A chair falls from under her with a clatter. She exclaims to him to get out, that she doesn't want to see him anymore. The girl shouts indignantly to her brother not to come here anymore and that he doesn't owe her anything. Andreas tries to stop her. He shouts after her that he will bring him back. His eyes are filled with despair and drops of sweat come to his face. His mouth is wide open. Andreas looks at the slammed door. This is the first time he's seen Emmy in this state. His engraved ring was very important to her. Tears come to his eyes and cover his eyes. He cannot hold back the tears, his lips trembling. He doesn't realize what this terrible feeling is that has taken hold of him. It's the first time he's experienced it. Andreas is annoyed. He promises himself that he will be sure to return the ring as soon as possible. Nickel, in his SWAT uniform, stands at the grave and salutes. He thinks about what's the point of life if you just exist. Nickel, already retired from Special Forces, scraggly and bearded, realizes that he wasn't happy when he was surviving on his own. Andreas takes a serious look. He realizes that he has to deal with what he has. He decides for himself that he accepts Lucia's proposal. It's dawning over the academy. Everything is lit with a beautiful warm light. Someone's voice telling them to get up and run around a bit. Andreas is engaged in jogging. Lucia is lying on a bench, doing nothing. As he runs past her, she shouts to him that he will succeed, even though he is a dumbass. They're hard at work practicing potions. They're trying to get what they want. But so far, nothing's been successful. Andreas has taken a thorough look at his physical shape. His body is gradually gaining relief. At this moment, Lucia is just sleeping on the bench. They are carefully trying to brew the potion they need. They have concentrated expressions on their faces. They spend all their free time practicing and experimenting. Lucia lies on the couch all the time because of her illness. Andreas feels that sometimes she changes and helps to make things faster. Andreas is working on the potion, while Lucia continues to sleep. He asks her why he feels like he's the only one trying. Andreas feels like she's pissing him off. He is holding a flask with a green chemical substance in it. Lucia sits behind him, covered with a plaid. She advises him to reduce the amount of matarata and increase the amount of Todoros extract. He accepts to do as she advises him. He does as Lucius told him to do. He knows that her intuition is very accurate, and sometimes it gets right to the root of the problem. Andreas is meticulously grinding the grass. He does it all for the money. He realizes that working together with Lucia is really better. From a narrow test tube, he adds some red substance to a large test tube, which begins to gurgle. Not to be mistaken, Andreas takes a pipette and draws the resulting substance into it. To make sure everything is extremely precise, Andreas uses a pipette to add it drop by drop into a narrow-necked flask. The red droplets sink into the violet substance and mix with it to form a homogeneous liquid. Suddenly, an electronic scoreboard appears in front of him, saying that he has produced a medium-level enhancement potion. Andreas jumps up from his chair with joy. He is insanely happy that they have succeeded. Frightened, Lucia asks him what happened. Andreas turns around to the girl. A happy expression can be seen on his face. He smiles slightly and shouts that they finally got it working. On the electronic scoreboard, it pops up that his potion's talent, which has a temporary enhancement, has been obtained. All conditions have been met. Andreas looks at the scoreboard in surprise. He is surprised that he has received a new talent that he has the ability to develop to 33%. Condition met. A specimen capable of evolution has been discovered. Angela Lucifer has a 55% chance of successful evolution. His face expresses utter despair. He realizes that 32% is even lower than when he triggered the vampiress's evolution. The electronic scoreboard disappears in front of Andreas. He realizes that it is better to leave it for now and refuses to use the option offered to him. A delighted Lucia says that the potion they brewed can be drunk every day and that it has virtually no side effects. Agreeing with her, Andreas tells her to do it, since practically all the work before was done by him. The girl joyfully jumps up and raises her hand in the air. She tells Andreas that she will be busy with the exam starting tomorrow. The sky above the academy is already getting darker. The sun is almost over the horizon. It's getting gloomy. The electronic scoreboard reports that there are 14 days, 21 hours, and 33 minutes left until Angela Lucifer evolves. Angela also lies behind the bars, shackled in chains. Her eyes are full of emptiness and despair. The girl is lying there thinking what she did. Her whole body is aching and guttural. She is shrouded in a purple haze. But she feels that there is something more to this pain. A fast orange train is passing through a tunnel. The teacher's stern voice says that when they reach the exam location, the students need to all gather together so he can explain how it will be administered. Andreas is sitting in a wagon. He has a black bag in his lap and a book in his hands. He is concentrating on the fact that people don't want Lucia to be able to pass the first exam. He looks up at the tall, golden tower. It's all shimmering with gold glitter. It looks very mesmerizing. The teacher says that after this, the last part will take place in this magic tower. Andreas reminisces about how hard he's been practicing. He tells himself that he practiced a lot, so his necromancy and sword skills have grown considerably. Looking up from his potions book, he reassures himself and says that everything will be fine if he can pass his exams. He realizes that the vampire's evolution is complete, so maybe we should check on her. She's still in Karen's custody. Students are sitting in the carriage. Andreas is sitting among them. He is thinking about the fact that if he makes an excuse when he gets back, he can go and check on the vampire girl. Across from him sits a black-haired girl. A girl with a bow on her head asks a black-haired girl about what she thinks the exams will be like this time. She says with a satisfied face that the task and the composition of the group will be random, so if you're lucky, it will be easy. The girl with black hair says she doesn't care who they put her with. It doesn't matter to her. The girl with the bow tie takes her by the shoulder and says that even in such a matter, she is a model student, covering her mouth with the palm of her hand so no one can hear what she's saying. She whispers in the black-haired girl's ear that it's not that simple. The black-haired girl doesn't understand what he means. She points a finger at Andreas and asks, what happens if she gets in the same group as him? Andreas puts his book in his briefcase. His physical condition had gotten much better. His body began to show relief. His arms became more pumped. His chest became wider. Here the girl with black hair rounds her eyes wide and realizes that this is a scenario she had not even considered. Suddenly, the teacher's voice is heard, informing them that they are arriving at the Orkland training station in 1 minute. The train stops, and the teacher tells everyone to go to the exit. The students got out of the train car. The rest get out, including the teacher. Everyone stands and waits eagerly to see what the teacher will say and what the assignment will be. They stopped outside the Orkland training station. The teacher talked about how, as previously reported, the third-year exams would be a group assignment with random members of the group. The teacher looks at the sheet and says that each group will consist of 3 students from the warrior branch, 1 student from the mage branch, and a mentor. All the students are mesmerized, listening to what he is saying. The groups have until tomorrow to complete the assignment they have received. He wishes good luck to everyone involved. The building looks a little gloomy. It has a typical design. The announcement of the bands begins. It's a sunny day. There is not a single cloud in the sky, only snow-white clouds. Andreas realizes that something unpleasant awaits next. There are an odd number of villains at the academy, except for him and Charon, and in this exam, 2 of them are in his group. All of the students are looking at the teacher. They are waiting to finally announce who they will be in a group with. In the group with Andreas, the first player is the cult-fighting, fanatical Hazar Gapri. The second player is the Academy's indiscriminate assassin, the crazy Vivian. Andres holds up the participant sheet for group number 9, where his members are listed. He wonders why he is in the same group with them. Resenting his luck as a bad character, someone suddenly calls out to him. He turns around and sees a guy from his band standing in front of him. A guy with blue hair stands in front of him. He introduces himself as Christopher and informs him that he is in the same group with him. He looks arrogantly at Andreasus and says that he seems to be training as a warrior, even though he is a mage. Andreasus wonders why he has such aggression towards him. Just then a guy walks up to them and smiles. He waves his hand and introduces himself as Hazar Gapri. Behind him stands a girl who is also a member of their future team, Vivian. Fanatic Hazar smiles at everyone all the time. He has a happy expression on his face. He talks about how he thinks being an unfriendly warrior is a bad thing. Behind her, standing behind her, a girl with a disgruntled face introduces herself as Vivian Belkag. Her lips tighten. She thinks they're fucked up guys. Christopher asks Hazard, who else isn't friendly? He tries to show with his hand that he doesn't mean that. Andreas concludes that there is even a bandit-like knight in this group. Andreas turns to Christopher and asks him why he should leave alone a mage copying warrior training. He replies that he doesn't mind everyone needing a little exercise. That's when the handler comes up and talks about them not fighting. Their problems do not end in this group. Andreas looks indignantly at her handler. She stands leaning against the wall and spits. She has a cigarette in her hands. Andreas wonders why they also have a bull on their handler. The curator looks at his team and says he thinks about it being his worst group. Some amount of time passes, and the teacher says that since all the members of the group have gathered, the group can get their assignment. He asks everyone to try to come back alive. Andreas's team is assembled. On the face of it, they seem completely different, unsuitable for each other. But Andreas has high hopes that they will succeed. There are doubts that he will be able to come back alive with such a group. A black train filled with students heading off somewhere at high speed. In the carriage sits a woozy curator, smoking a cigarette and introducing herself as Claire, the curator of the 9th group. Christopher sits next to her and looks at his mentor with shock. Claire pulls out a piece of paper and points it at the students. They stare questioningly. The sheet says they need to investigate the village in Baron Ballaric's territories. Rumor has it that the landowner of the village, Trim, has been murdered. An investigator was sent 2 weeks ago, but he too has disappeared. An investigation by the Mercenary Guild is needed. Claire looks arrogantly at a group of her students and asks if they have any questions. An indifferent Andreas thinks about how it is much more interesting compared to the game. Behind him, Hazar Gapri sits and smiles. A girl with short yellow hair and fiery eyes stands leaning on a huge golden sword. She is the soon-to-be Stent Master of Aura, and no further information about her is known. A girl sits at a computer monitor that shows Claire's persona. The girl thinks her skills are decent, but she's afraid her persona will complicate things. The curator turns to Christopher and, referring to Andreas, says that she heard that the algae head was trying to play knight the other day. Claire looks overconfident. She turns to Andreas and asks him about the fact that can he even pull his weight? Andreas confusedly replies that he doesn't want to hear this from someone who needs to chew on bits of jerky, dried in special conditions to stay calm. She replies to him that she's not allowed to smoke in here, and asks him if he wants her to start chewing on him instead. Hazar Gapri, sitting next to Andreas, chuckled. Andreas is only thinking about getting here soon. The castle rises majestically above the village. A road leads to the castle, bounded on both sides. The sun is beginning to appear in the sky. Andreas and his team approach the castle, walking along the road. Ivy's curator remarks that this castle is very huge for a baron. Baron Ballaric is sitting in a chair and addresses the students. He says that they have come a long way. He looks thoughtful. The curator sits across from him. A table is set up with various sweets on it. Ivy turns to the Baron and says that the situation is tragic, however. The Baron wants to explain briefly what happened. A butler stands to the left and silently observes the guests. He begins his story by saying that the landowner of this village called Trim is his nephew. He was a baronet, but he had no family. A cup and saucer into which aromatic coffee is poured stands on the edge of the table. He reports that this is all the information he has. He has a look of hopelessness in his eyes. The curator scrutinizes a piece of paper on which important notes have been jotted down. He thanks the Baron for providing them with the details. Andreas stands with his hands folded beside the curator. His butler approaches the Baron and addresses him. He whispers something in his ear. There is still an untouched mug of coffee and a sugar bowl on the table. The butler whispers the phrase, "young master," to him, and you can't hear the rest. His gaze is a bit frightened and slightly wary. The Baron's gaze depicts surprise when he heard what the butler whispered to him. At that moment, the Baron looks at Andreas. Andreas stands behind them with a nonchalant face, his arms folded across his chest. Andreas suspected it was about him. He narrows his eyes and has no idea what it's about. The Baron coughed slightly and squinted his eyes with his hand to his mouth. He was thinking about something. The curator also continues to study what is written on the piece of paper, the others standing behind her. Andreas stands distantly away from them. The Baron turns to them, saying at the same time that he needs to get down to business. The butler, dressed in a vest, bowed his head to them, saying at the same time that he was apologizing for their rudeness and informing them that the young gentleman was not well. Ivy's handler says it's okay, that they've gotten all the parts they need and will be on their way soon. She waves her hand. The butler looks suspiciously at Andreas. His gaze is filled with anger, his lips tight. Andreas turns to the butler and wonders why he is looking at him like that. He felt uncomfortable. The sky becomes peach-colored. There is not a single cloud in the sky. Ivy's handler and his team leave the building where they talk to the Baron. Outside, Christopher is waiting for them. Ivy's handler turns to him and tells him that he has done a good job keeping track of the uniforms. Ivy's handler pulls her sword out of its sheath and is suspicious that the Baron is too calm, though. He has a nephew missing. She suspects something is amiss. Ivy's handler continues to examine her steel sword while turning to Andreas. She asks him about why he insisted they go immediately. Andreas answers her that yes, he thought a lot of things were suspicious. Andreas was particularly suspicious of the part about the missing investigators with whom communication had broken down. It sounded like a fabricated story. The curator looks at him carefully and listens to what he says. A memory flashes through Andreas's mind. He recalls the face of the Baron and his butler. It was strange that they had sent investigators only once, even though a whole month had passed. But the most suspicious, he thought, was the butler's behavior. He recalls that the butler turned to the curator and said he would probably get there before nightfall. The butler says it would be better for them to rest tonight and set out tomorrow. His gaze is filled with an incomprehensible anger, and he is too serious. Ivy's handler addresses him and tells him that it's nice that they're concerned about them, but they shouldn't be, that work comes first. Andreas remembers the look in the butler's eyes. He is furious, and he is very angry about something. Andreas recalls that after they refused to stay, the butler had a look as if his plan had failed. Andreas thought they looked very anxious. Their demeanor, their behavior, the way they breathed, their slightest gestures, and the trembling in their hands gave them away. Andreas was clearly convinced that their behavior was exactly as if they were hiding something. The team begins to take turns loading into the wagon. They decide that they need to make a trip to the village right now because things are definitely not easy with this request. The coachman, who is driving the wagon, whips his horses to run even faster. The cart is pulled by 2 fast horses. They pass along a path in the deep woods, and the dust from the wheels can be seen from under the cart. The 5 men of the team are sitting in the wagon. Andreas continues to remain detached. Christopher asks everyone about the fact that shouldn't the first thing they do upon arrival be to find a place to stay? They have the investigation as their priority. The rest is not so important. Andreas stares absent-mindedly out the window. He realizes that the whole affair is suspicious, but for now, they can only discreetly check everything. The curator turns to everyone and says that the landowner's castle must be inspected first. Andreas feels something begin to happen. He puts his hand to his pendant. He doesn't immediately realize what is happening here. He clenched his fists tightly and began to realize that his mana had suddenly begun to waver. He tries to keep his cool without giving any sign of it, and looks at the people sitting across from him. He feels it getting stronger the closer they get to the village. Suddenly, their wagon begins to shake. Their eyes fill with terror. They cannot immediately realize what is happening here. They start shaking in different directions. Hazar turns to the coachman and shouts loudly for him to pull away. Ivy's handler continues to sit there with a nonchalant face. Christopher looks out the window and addresses the coachman angrily. But when he sees that something wrong is happening to the coachman, he opens his eyes wide in amazement. The coachman looks terrible. His mouth is wide open and drooling. His eyes are bulging. He whips his horses with great force to make them run as fast as possible. They look terribly intimidating too. Horses are rushing at breakneck speed. Everything is flying in different directions from under their wheels. Christopher turns to Hazard and talks about something being wrong with the coachman. They do not understand what is wrong with him. Ivy's handler suspiciously tries to scrutinize the coachman's face. She kicks her foot against the wall of the wagon with all her might so they can get out of there. The back wall collapses, but it gives them nothing. The wreckage of the carriage falls straight to the ground. The curator realizes it's too late. She peeks out of the wagon to see where they're going. She, standing in the doorway, turns to everyone and tells them to get ready to jump out of the cart immediately. Christopher yells in exasperation that right now they're going to smack into the gate. Vivian looks at the scene, peering out of the wagon, her gaze betraying no emotion. The wagon is shattered to pieces. Maddened horses are flying in different directions. The whole stair from the ground has risen and nothing can be seen. All the parts of the wagon are blown to pieces. Everything around starts to burn and crackle. The coachman flies a great distance away. The coachman's frantic gaze is directed at the creatures beside him. Pretty girls in dresses are doing some dance-like movements. The coachman continues to lie on the ground, with some madness going on around him. They pay no attention to him and continue dancing. Christopher tries to pull Hazard out of the overturned wagon. They look on in amazement. Everyone has climbed out of the wagon. They try to catch their breath and look at what's going on here. They can't understand what they are all doing. The villagers have just gone crazy. Crazy-looking horses are mad, baring their teeth and making moaning noises. Andreas's gaze is filled with disdain. He's staring at everything that's going on and can't look away. Hazard wrinkled his face, not quite happy to be watching. The unknown creatures with glowing eyes still continue to move as well. Their arms and legs are twisted. From their mouths, drooling hands, their eyes and hands pointing high toward the heavens. It's as if they're screaming something. Their mouths are wide open, their hair developing in different directions. Christopher turns to Andreas and asks him, "What's going on here? What's wrong with these villagers?" He reproachfully reminds him that he is a mage and should know all of this. Andreas begins to guess what's going on here. He realizes that everything makes sense now, that what happened in the beginning with his mana in the wagon wasn't just an anomaly. A blue light begins to emanate from his chest area. He realizes that his mana is reacting this way, which means it's all black magic. It was already quite dark outside. The wrecked wagon flew straight into the fountain. The distraught townspeople in the square around the fountain are still dancing. From a bird's eye view, you can see that the entire village is starting to be engulfed in green light. It all looks very gloomy. A young boy with distraught eyes is staring somewhere. His mouth is wide open, drooling. His pupils are red in color. Suddenly, Vivian grabs him and knocks him face down to the floor. The boy grits his teeth and stares down at them in horror. Vivian sat on top of him and twisted his arms behind his back. Everyone else is beside them. Hazard leaned over and regarded him with interest. Vivian concludes that he is stronger than the average child. The guy's gaze is directed at them, smiling madly, tears streaming from his eyes. Hazard examines this boy's foot. He realizes that he has been dancing all day. His feet are in a terrible state. He talks about it being just as he thought it was, a curse. He turns to face Christopher, holding the boy's foot in his hands, and asks him about the fact that there must be some connection between their assignment and this curse. Christopher replies that the landowner has been gone for about a month. If they had been dancing all that time, they would have died of fatigue long ago. Andreas supports Christopher's version and says that it looks like someone is making sure they don't die. Christopher looks at Andreas with a slightly detached expression. He senses some kind of trick from him. Ivy's handler brings a hand to her forehead and concludes that they've probably been dragged into something problematic. Vivian continues to sit on the boy's back, twisting his hands behind his back so he can't move. Andreas reflects on the fact that his character didn't die here in the game. He thinks back to the butler's words. He begins to think that if they had accepted his offer to rest at the castle and travel on to the next one, things would have turned out differently. He began to fantasize about them relaxing in the castle, taking alcoholic drinks, and enjoying the goodies. Andreas realizes that if they had stayed in the castle, the Baron would have hidden what was happening from them. But they immediately arrive in the village, and the situation is different. They have gotten into something dangerous. Remembering Heron's enraged face, he decided that the mana he sensed was roughly at his level. But using it on such a scale seemed strange. The distraught villagers still continue to dance in the square around the fountain. Andreas opens his eyes wide and can't believe he has the artifact. Christopher, seeing that Andreas has a frightened face, asks him, "What's wrong?" Andreas says that they know too little and suggests that they search the landowner's house first. They go for the first step, which is called information gathering. A dark night stands over the village. The bright stars in the sky are visible. The team approaches a huge, gloomy building. It is the landowner's house. In front of it stand the bodies of people who are burning in the fire. They stop and stare dumbfounded at this majestic building. The curator kicks in the front door of the landowner's house with a single kick. Armed, they try to cautiously enter the building. The curator and Hazard are the first to enter. The others stay outside. They begin to quickly look around the room from the inside. There are more windows with bars in the room. Walking a little further, they see that there are a lot of corpses lying on the floor. They are lying in different poses. Their faces are frozen with horror, and their mouths are wide open. Their eyes are open, their pupils rolled back. It looks as if they are frozen, but they are actually dead. Ivy and Andreas's handler walks forward. Christopher stops and considers everything around him. He paused over one of the corpses and reasoned that their robes looked like Imperial investigators. He leaned closer to the corpse and concluded that they had been dead for a long time. The rest of the guys from the team stand behind him and watch what he's doing. Andreas says with a nonchalant face that maybe they can figure out what's going on their own. The curator looks at him contemptuously, not understanding what he's saying. Andreas goes on to say that from what they saw, he thinks it's the work of a black magician. The curator chews on something and is asked on what basis he drew that conclusion. The creature is clothed in red. The only thing visible on his face are his bright, glowing red eyes. His fingers are swollen. He amplifies people's emotions and trades them for magical power. The curator says suspiciously that it is human emotion that feeds black magic after all. Standing across from each other, the curator says the landowner must have been killed as well. Andreas agrees with her assumption because he would most likely have gotten in their way. With a sly look on his face, Christopher asks about what does it mean that the burning bodies in the street are part of some black ritual. Andreas is slightly startled by his ironic look. He looks at him and replies to him that maybe that's the way it is. The curator says that they will still only know the truth after they catch the criminals, and he says they need to search every corner of the estate first. They walk down the hallway. Everywhere they come, across dead bodies lying on the floor, they decide to split into different sides to search everything as quickly as possible. Andreas is holding a tricycle with a glowing candle. He's holding a piece of paper of some kind. He lights one of the paintings hanging on the wall and scrutinizes it. The curator stands beside him. Vivian stands behind him, her face tight and tears welling up in her eyes. They are in one of the rooms of the manor. Vivian is looking out the window. They haven't found anything yet, not even the landowner's body. Vivian turns to Hazard and tells him to look outside. Andreas goes to the window and is amazed at what he sees. His mouth is open in amazement. Hundreds of villagers who danced on the platform are heading towards the landowner's palace where they are. Andreas realizes that the intruder is making his move. They wonder what they should do now. The people of the city are heading towards the palace with mad faces. Their eyes glow white. It's as if someone is controlling them. The team realizes that they most likely spotted them. It was as if they were waiting for them to go into the building to attack. Hazard hysterically asks Ivy's handler what they should do now. She can't find the words. She's thinking about the right thing for them to do now. Her voice is full of despair and hopelessness. She shouts to everyone that they need to stop the search and leave the building immediately. She points to Hazar to find them an escape route. Hazar instantly takes instructions and immediately goes into action. He runs at a high rate of speed in hopes of finding an escape route to avoid being caught by the distraught citizens of the town. Suddenly he stops and starts squinting, hoping he's imagining things. But it didn't appear to him. In front of him are hundreds of distraught townspeople. They attack him, and he cannot fight them off. They grab his arms, their expressions frantic. Hazar screams and tries to fight them off, but he fails. They attack him from all sides. He has nowhere to run. Hazar is just above them, but that doesn't stop them. They push him so hard that they push him to the floor and he falls. Christopher and Andreas are standing there, and they see him and run to his aid immediately. Christopher pushes Hazard away from the distraught townspeople who are attacking them. Pulling out his sword, he literally rips them apart. He swings and tries to defend himself. At that moment, he shouts to Hazar to protect the mage, meaning Andreas. At this point, he, grinning, shouts that he will take care of the front. Christopher urges Hazard to run and protect Andreas immediately so that the maddened people won't get to him. He was the only hope for salvation. Suddenly, Christopher notices something that discourages him. He freezes in absolute shock. The image of a furry monster that destroys everything in its path appears before him. Andreas's face shows streaks of blood that splattered directly into his face. The monster appears and attacks with unthinkable force. A yellow mist appears all around, and Christopher falls to the floor and can't get up. He doesn't have enough strength. It's as if everything is in a fog. Andreas is watching it all. Andreas becomes almost transparent, almost imperceptible. His eyes are dazed. He can't understand what's going on here. The unknown creature lies with its eyes closed and does not move. Christopher flew off with great force and hit his head on the floor. His face was bruised, his eyes were closed, and he was unconscious. Andreas crawls over to help Christopher by calling out to him. It's like everything is a blur. He can't see very well. His eyes are all split. Ivy's handler yells to him that they are still advancing and asks Andreas what he is doing. At this point, Hazard is dragged on his back without Christopher, who is unconscious. Ivy's handler grabs Andreas and throws him on his back. His eyes are closed, and he is unconscious. Ivy's handler yells that they need to get out of here and turns to Vivian, pointing to the window. Vivian realizes lightning fast what is wanted of her, and with one swipe of her foot, shatters the huge window in the middle of the hall. Ivy's handler is still dragging Andreas, and Hazard is still dragging Christopher. They are both unconscious. Ivy's handler, holding Andreas on her shoulders, leaps out the window. The distraught townspeople continue to stand under the windows, hoping for an attack on them. They make a jump from the second floor and land on the ground. The curator continues to hold Andreas on his shoulders, and Hazard holds Christopher on his shoulders. His head hangs down. They rush as far away from the landowner's palace as possible, swearing loudly as they do so. They are running at a great speed. Andreas comes to his senses and turns around. He sees a whole herd of distraught townsfolk running after them. He realizes that he has fallen into a flashback from his last operation at the most inopportune time. A white magic ball appears in Andreas's hands, emitting a glowing field around him. It also remains on the back of Ivy's handler. He swings this ball at the distraught villagers running after them. Andreas throws this ball at the inhabitants, which forms an earth shield that allows them to escape. It restricts access to them. The curator at this point asks Andreas what's wrong with him. Does he not think he is alone? They also continue to move further away from the cultivator's palace. The curator at this point keeps telling Andreas not to waste his mana carelessly. He asks him if he can track the location of the black magician. They approach some low houses standing at the edge of the village. Andreas answers him that he can do it now. Andreas ponders the fact that this mage uses his mana, so obviously he should have no trouble finding him. He proceeds with the ritual in such a way that he is completely immersed in himself and tries to feel where the black magician is in this way. A large number of others like him rush out and go lightning fast to seek out the black magician. Green streaks form around the circle. It helps you focus on your goal. You can see yellow flashes everywhere that look like cracked circles. Mana shines through all the rooms to determine where the black mage is. He shines a light on a barn-like building. No black mage is detected in it either. Andreas opens his eyes wide. He sees that the mage's location has been determined. They're aiming that way. Andreas reports that the black mage is in the house at 9 o'clock, about 100 meters away. The curator praises him. They rush at an unthinkable speed. They rush past the distraught citizens of the city. They fly off in different directions. Andreas asks Ivy's handler to stop, his hand trying to cover his face. The curator is heading with insane speed to where the black mage was discovered. She jumps all the obstacles with ease and rushes past the residential houses. They enter the premises of the house. An unknown person watches them through the window. The unknown man is the black mage. He has a white mask on his face. He has serious eyes. He didn't expect to be discovered so quickly. The curator kicks the door with all his might. The whole place goes to pieces. The door is lying at the curator's feet. The steel-long sword is already in her hands. She realizes that they have come right to the right place. Andreas, left outside the door, asks her about the fact that she absolutely has to kick down every door in the way. Suddenly, a purple veil appears in the doorway where the door Ivy's handler had just kicked in. They remain separate rooms. There is a magical wall between them. The curator looks at it and realizes frustratedly that it was a trap. Andreas is desperately screaming. How could they have gotten caught in it so easily? Ivy's handler tries to touch the glowing wall. She realizes with horror that the black mage has so easily overpowered them. Damn. Behind her back sits a girl with a bloody mouth. She's all twitchy and shaking. She calls out to Ivy's handler, calling her sister. She turns around in horror to see an unknown girl sitting next to her. One of the girl's eyes is bandaged. Her eyes are falling out of the eye socket. Her mouth is wide open, her whole face and bloodied. She is cramped up, very cold and in pain. The curator looks at her in horror. She recognizes her and calls out Noah's name. At the same time, Andreas tries to break down the wall. He realizes that he can't do it. He tries to use some method, but all to no avail. Suddenly the words, "What a pity," are heard from somewhere, repeated several times. Andreas does not immediately understand what it means or where the sound is coming from. He hears this phrase more and more often and doesn't understand what it could mean. Next, the phrase, "like moths to a flame," is heard. The word flame is repeated several times. He does not understand what all this means or who is saying these words. Andreas looks up and sees that a purple negative has formed above him and a huge hole in the middle of it. This purple light starts to engulf everything around him into itself. He hears some sort of howl. He stares up into the sky with his eyes wide open. He is amazed at what is happening now and does not understand what it all means. He hears words to the effect that there is no need for haste. Everything has been predestined by God. A voice urges him to bow down to idleness. Andreas's eyes went wide, his lips tightened. He didn't understand what the word idleness meant. Andreas looks dumbfounded. His lips are slightly tightened, his hands are down, his gaze directed downward. He doesn't understand why those words were spoken now. A huge golden cube is in the middle of a burning flame. In the middle of the cube is something that looks like a star. In the middle of the star is a stone that glows brightly. This game is called The Great Sin. A huge tree stands in the middle of the red flames. It looks as if someone has taken possession of it. Starting with the idleness, the 7 deadly sins have been separated from the main body, the Apocalypse manuscript. By collecting them all, the main boss can be summoned. Andreas is thinking about something. Behind him, the distraught townspeople appear and try to attack him. At this moment, Andreas only thinks about the fact that these are the most important subjects of the story. One of the distraught townsfolk, a girl, tries to grab his leg, but he skillfully leaps out and bounces upward. In the jump, Andreas thinks only about why the phrase is mentioned here, in a village that didn't even appear in the story. As Andreas tries to escape, someone's hand is pointed straight towards him to grab him, but he resolutely dodges it. At this point, he realizes that he can't do it alone and needs to team up with everyone else for now. Andreas is dragged along the ground, flailing his legs, one of the distraught townsfolk dragging him. He deftly tackles them and heads off somewhere in the distance with unimaginable speed. He runs away, leaving the distraught townspeople behind. It's already a dark night outside. This brings even more terror and fear to Ivy's handler squad. A huge sword slices the distraught townsfolk to pieces. Their bodies split in half and fall to the ground. Vivian, with red-mad eyes, just chops their bodies into pieces. They go flying in all directions. She's merciless. The look in her eyes is frightening. She's insane. Her eyes are bloodshot. She wants everyone dead and easily slashes the maddened townsfolk with her sharp sword. Andreas rushes in. He sees the whole scene, and that Hazar is standing aside, and the immobilized Christopher is lying on the ground. He turns to Hazar and asks him what happened to Vivian. Hazard turns to Andres and makes sure he's okay. He's alive. He talks about how he has never seen Vivian like this before. Andreas looks suspiciously at Hazard and thinks about the fact that he knew he couldn't trust a fanatic. He observes that an immobilized Christopher is lying on the ground. His entire body is wounded, and his clothes are torn to shreds. He realizes that he can't leave his wounded ally alone, and he decides to play along. Andreas indignantly reports that there has been a disaster. Ivy's handler is trapped behind the barrier. Hazar can't believe his ears and panics, asking what they should do now. Andreas again hears the phrase, "What a shame." It scrolls through many times. He still doesn't understand what it would mean. He hears the question, "Do you realize you're killing innocent citizens?" Hazard hears this voice too. A purple haze forms over them. Andreas tells him that it is most likely a black mage. Andreas looks at Hazard. You can see the disdain in his eyes. He tells him about the black mage he must be near Ivy's handler. Hazard is crying hysterically. He realizes that she is in danger and tells Andreas that he is going to her and leaves the others to Andreas. Andreas looks at him with suspicion and disdain. Andreas looks after the departing Hazard and realizes that he is very easy to read, but it is better than betrayal. Vivian still continues to massacre the distraught citizens of the city. She still swings her sword desperately, tearing their bodies to pieces. Andreas looks at everything going on and realizes that none of this is good. He also realizes that it looks like the black magic is driving her crazy. If he moves, she will pull him into this meat grinder too. Vivian still continues to swing her sword vigorously as well, slashing the bodies of the city's inhabitants with ease. Andreas realizes with horror that she won't be able to dodge. His mouth is slightly open, his pupils constricted. Vivian looks mad. Her eyes are burning, and she swings her sword with such force that it doesn't end. Vivian easily impales the bodies of the distraught townsfolk. RNA massacres them with little effort. Vivian looks mad. She has a smile on her face and is laughing loudly. He watches it all with horror. Andreas looks at her and thinks about how it's a shame she wastes her material so thoughtlessly. He turns his head to the left and sees a black-clothed creature sitting on the roof of a building with a hood over his head. He asks Andreas that he is the only one who didn't get hurt escaped. What will he do now? Andreas answers him that he doesn't care. The creature sitting on the roof is leaning on one knee. It tells Andreas that it is strikingly calm. The creature is a black magician. Andreas looks up and tells him with a nonchalant face that he thought it was a good time for the boss to show up. Andreas looks away from him. The black mage tells him that he doesn't know where he gets so much confidence from. His gaze becomes fierce and fierce. He holds out his hand to him and says that in recognition of his bravery, he will give him a trial. Andreas is flying into some kind of abyss. He doesn't realize what's happening. He didn't expect this to happen to him. His eyes are wide open. His hair is developing. Andreas is indignant. He doesn't understand what's going on here. His eyebrows are furrowed, his gaze filled with rage. He falls into some abyss. He is blessed with a red light. He realizes that he has been careless. He still continues to fly into the unknown. His eyes are wide open. He doesn't know what will happen next. He looks at his hand and sees that it's just slowly disappearing somewhere, disintegrating into small pieces. Andreas doesn't realize what's happening. His whole body begins to disintegrate into small pieces and dissolve into the unknown. Andreas's face begins to disintegrate into small pixels. He just watches what is happening and can't understand anything. Suddenly, he hears some kind of sound, as if someone had pressed a key. He looks at his hands, can't believe what he sees. His hands are wearing the gloves he wore when he was a special forces officer named Makoto. He looks himself over and realizes that he is now not the character Andreas, but a real person. He's bloody. He is dressed in a military uniform. He can't understand what happened. Was it really a dream? He is sitting in a trench, and he hears an incredible explosion happening behind him with tremendous power. Everything around him explodes. He's holding a weapon and can't figure out where everyone is. He has a backpack on his back, his helmet flying off his head from the explosion. He holds his head. It's splitting open. Blood runs straight to his eyes. He's heading into the unknown. His steps are confident and determined. He is trying to figure out where he is and what is going on here. Suddenly his eyes widen, his pupils narrow, one eye already covered in blood. He sees dead people all around him. A strange creature with glowing eyes stands on a hillock. Everything around him is ablaze with yellow flames. He scrutinizes the man he knows in him. The man shouts, addressing him by the name Makoto and telling him to run away immediately. One of his arms is torn off. Makoto looks at the man in horror and realizes it's Shohei. He tries to call out to him. Makoto swiftly runs towards him to hold him back, but he falls straight to the ground. He takes him by the neck and tries to bring him back to consciousness. He screams at him, but he doesn't respond. His eyes are rolled back, his mouth is open, one part of his head is missing. Makoto is shocked at what is happening. He screams loudly and tries to bring Shohei to his senses, but he realizes that he is most likely dead. Makoto holds it in his hands and sees his face start to crack and disintegrate into pieces. Halfway through, he turns into a man with green hair. It's his father. Makoto holds the body tightly in her arms and can't believe it. Everything around her is crackling. There is a bifurcation of the man. One half is the character Andreas, and the other half is the soldier Makoto. His father holds out an engraved gold signet to Andreas. He tells him that as long as he has it, he will be recognized as the true lord of House Cromwell. Andreas continues to hold the split character in his arms. His father talks to him about not letting him drag him down anymore. He says that Andreas was happy together with Emmy. Tears come to Andreas's eyes. He is certain that his father is in front of him. He is discouraged and can't say anything. He completely transforms into Andreas, Makoto's image disappearing. Andreas falls back into the abyss. His arm tenses. He's back in the game. The black mage looks questioningly at what is happening next to him. He watches as a glittering ball forms in front of him. Andreas climbs out of it. The black mage is dumbfounded and can't believe his eyes. Everything crackles, sparkles, and flares. The black magician steps back rather quickly. Everything explodes and goes flying in different directions. The black magician is blinded by the bright light. Andreas is fully back. Shards of glass flew off all around him. He still didn't realize what had just happened to him, where he had been. The black mage looks at him and can't believe it. How was he able to come back? He asks Andreas how he was able to escape his curse of idleness. Andreas just stands silently with his eyes down. Shards still fly in different directions and fall to the ground. Andreas thinks to himself that he's had enough. He calls up the electronic scoreboard to find out what just happened to him. 100% of Makoto Kaneshiro and Andreas Cromwell's character synchronization level has been achieved. He has obtained the talent of fighting. This talent is exceptional. This curse of his idleness is just a game that simply simulates someone's injuries. He looks at the scoreboard and asks the black mage that the caster's abilities are insufficient. The black mage stops. He laughs and can't believe what Andreas just said and interjects him. The tip of the sword could be seen, black flames issuing around it. The sword is aimed at Andreas, but he manages to dodge it. The whole place explodes. Andreas looks confidently at the black magician and asks him what he's going to do now. He tells him that it would never work on someone like him, having received special forces training. The black mage mutters something to himself. He is very angry with Andreas and realizes that he is helpless. The black mage viciously shuts him up. He throws a magic sword at him to nail him. Andreas flies away from the explosion that came from the sword strike. As he flies, he notices that Christopher is sitting unconscious nearby. The blast is aimed at him, but he bounces off and flies away. He manages to escape. Andreas stops and realizes that he's not that strong, but he can't do it without the use of the mantle. Andreas breaks his foot sharply. A dead body lies beneath his feet. He turns back around and sees that some kind of black magic ball has formed behind him. Andreas stands in front of the dead body and sees that no one is watching what is happening. The black mage jumps off the roof, with Christopher sitting unconscious beneath him. Andreas looks at him from a little farther away. The black mage stops and with a menacing expression asks Andreas who he is. Andreas says he's going to show who he is right now. A blue glowing ball of light forms in his hands. He calls up an electronic scoreboard and summons a skeleton. His facial expression portrays complete confidence. The black mage stares questioningly. His eyes are wide open, his pupils constricted. The electronic scoreboard says that 23 corpses have been found. Andreas's skill level is insufficient. 9 corpses will be activated. The dead citizens of the city under Andreas's feet begin to resurrect, turning into ugly skeletons. The electronic scoreboard reads that the skeleton summoning was successful. A black mask appears on Andreas's face. His eyes have turned red. Behind him stands his army of animated skeletons. They crunch with every movement. The black mage cries out in horror, "Necromancer!" He looks at them with undisguised anger and asks Andreas about the fact that the congregation has already found out what he is doing. Andreas looks at him angrily and becomes convinced that there is indeed a congregation of mages here. He laughs. He continues to convince himself that the black mage has gotten it all wrong, and he can use that to shake him off his trail. 7 ordinary skeletons and 2 soldier skeletons were summoned. They stand behind him and wait for orders. There is a satisfied grin on Andreas's face. He tells the black mage that he has been entrusted with the return of the Page of Idleness in the name of the congregation. The black mage raises his hands to the top and forms black magic circles and flames. He asks Andreas that he will only fight skeletons. The angry skeletons are on the attack. Their mouths are wide open, eager for retribution. The black mage uses several black swords. He asks Andreas what he thinks he can do with the power of idleness. His swords head straight for the skulls of the skeletons. They crumble into small pieces. A terrible spectacle is taking place. The swords fired by the black mage fly straight into the skeletons and chop them into bones. Everything is on fire and burning. Andreas looks at it with horror. He didn't expect this. Andreas forms an earth shield in front of him. Swords fly at him and pierce it, but don't reach Andreas. The black mage yells at him to stop screwing around. He feels his advantage over him. Andreas directs magical mana to the side, summoning Nickel, his chief assistant, to his aid. Black magical streaks form around the black magician. He talks about how these skeletons are just gnats to him. Andreas, hiding behind an earthen shield, turns around and sees someone's hand gripping his sword tightly in his hands. It is the skeleton Nickel he has summoned. Nickel jumps up and heads for the black mage with all the fury he can muster. Andreas still sits in his hiding place. The black mage looks at him questioningly. His gaze expresses slight consternation. The unbelievable is happening. Skeleton Nickel tears apart with his sword the spears of darkness that the black mage released. The black mage's eyes widened. He hadn't expected this wretched skeleton to be so strong and dangerous. The black magician holds a magical golden cube that emits a magical red light. Andreas stares wide-eyed at it. He can't believe his eyes. Nickel's defense against the black mage's sword strikes is excellent. His eyes are furious and red in color. He let out a wall of defense in front of him. The magical cube begins to disintegrate into several plates, still continuing to burn with a bright golden flame. Andreas continues to observe all of this. He realizes this page of idleness. The black magician thinks of the unthinkable, that the likes of Andreas could force him to use his precious collection of the power of idleness. This magical cube starts to create huge hands with long claws around it, which try to grab Nickel and Andreas. Everything around it burns with magical purple fire. The black mage unleashes sharp spears at Nickel and Andreas, while saying that Andreas will pay with his life for interfering with his plans. A multitude of huge hands try to hit Nickel and Andreas. Everything around them glows and burns. Nickel skillfully dodges the blows. When they miss, they hit straight to the ground. The blows make everything around them explode. Andreas dodges the punch and leaps away from it. He looks behind him, his hands clenched into fists, very angry. He realizes that at this speed, he still has time to react. He's glad that Nickel is strong enough to withstand his attacks. Nickel swings his sword skillfully and sharply. He is a true professional. He outruns all the blows and dodges the Black Mage's attack. The hand that was released by Black Mage is actively trying to grab him. Nickel manages to avoid it, though. The Black Mage is enjoying watching the action. The Black Mage stands there looking at all of this. He has a puzzled look on his face. He shouts for the one to die in silence. Andreas looks at all of this and realizes that the Black Mage's attacks have become even stronger. Everything around him flames and explodes. He dodges the Black Mage's blows. He realizes he has trouble controlling the force, which means he hasn't fully mastered the powers of idleness yet. Andreas tries to get close to Nickel. He advises him to get to his blind spot and destroy him. Andreas is behind the skeleton, who is waving his sword angrily. Andreas tries to call out to him. The Black Mage's spear strikes Nickel directly. Everything burns and explodes from the impact. It destroyed him. The huge hands that the Black Mage had released stops and dangles, motionless. The Black Mage looks on admiringly and realizes that he has won. He has destroyed the skeleton. Andreas holds onto his shoulder and continues to head towards him confidently. The Black Mage thinks about how very persistent he is. Andreas walks towards the Black Mage and smirks. He says, confused, that he only got Nickel and he destroyed him. The Black Mage looks questioningly at Andreas. His eyes are wide. The giant hands that were released by the Black Mage are lying on the ground, unmoving. The Black Mage holds a glowing magic cube and laughs at Andreas. He says that it is his fault, but advises him not to worry. The Black Mage holds a glowing figure that has disintegrated into plates and tries to point it at Andreas. He tells him that he will send Andreas after Nickel. Huge hands with long claws came to life and headed straight for Andreas with more force, trying to grab him. Andreas looks at what is happening. There isn't a drop of fear in his eyes. He is absolutely sure of himself. Suddenly, the skeleton Nickel appears behind the Black Mage. The man senses that something is not right here. He realizes that there is someone behind him. The sharp sword of Nickel's skeleton swipes the head across the Black Mage's entire body. His eyes go blank in an instant, pupils constricted. Andreas watches as the Black Mage splits into two halves. Skeleton Nickel just chopped him in half. Andreas looks up at the sky, the purple negativity dissipating. He wonders who could have arranged all this. Nickel and Andreas stand silently looking at the Black Mage's chopped up body. It lies immobile on the ground. He is finished. The Black Magician's mask had fallen off. Andreas had never imagined that the Baron's butler would turn out to be a Black Magician. Andreas remembers the wary face of the butler. He immediately sensed that something was wrong. He looked very suspicious. Andreas concludes that the Baron is also somehow involved in all this. Near the Black Mage's immobilized arm lies a glowing cube, still emitting a bright light. Andreas takes this cube in his hands. It still continues to give off a bright light and does not fade. Andreas holds the cube in his hands and doesn't know what he should do with it. He can't just walk around with such a valuable item. The 7th chapter of Diligent Idleness comes. The mana recovery rate is 321%. Suddenly, Andreas realizes that there is still Nickel to give this magical artifact to. He turns around and Nickel is standing behind him, all his bones crunching. Andreas hands the cube to Nickel and tells him to take care of it. Nickel continues to cringe, but he smiles. The light from the magic cube disappears. Nickel replies to Andreas that he will put it in the summoning vault for now and think about what to do with it later. Nickel disappears down the magical corridor. Andreas looks around and sees that the barrier is not falling. He wonders if the caster is dead. Why isn't it falling down? Vivian still continues to massacre the town's distraught citizens. She's chopping everyone to pieces. Andreas thinks about leaving everyone behind and walking away, but at the same moment, he dismisses the thought. He realizes that he will have to explain to everyone what happened and how he survived. Andreas touches the barrier, which looks like a huge black marble stone, with his right hand, and realizes that this barrier is different from the one he was in. Suddenly, he senses something wrong. Something inexplicable begins to happen to him. His eyes widen with shock. He feels the barrier start to suck him inside. It happens very quickly. Only his legs remain outside. Andreas is completely engulfed by the black barrier. There's not a trace of him left. A little girl is staring dazedly somewhere. She's dressed in a lace dress and socks, with a thin headband on her head. Her eyes are full of terror. She is trembling with fear and terror. She looks at the red chair and sees that it is moving, as if someone is sitting on it. She can't believe her eyes. Andreas's ghost is sitting on a chair. She doesn't see it. She only hears it. At first she thinks the chair is talking, but then she realizes that someone is sitting on the chair, either a ghost or a demon. The ghost recognizes in this little girl the features of Vivian Belkin. He replies to the girl that he is not a ghost or a demon. The girl still stares in horror at what is happening, but cannot see anyone on the chair. Who is speaking to her? Andreas replies to her that he is a fairy. He talks about how he has come to save her. The girl looks questioningly at the chair and doesn't say a word. She dazedly can't take her eyes off the chair, arriving in utter horror at what is happening. Andreas thinks about how nice it all is, but what the hell is he doing? He reassures himself that he should be patient. After all, it's just a game. He's a fairy now. Andreas shows up at someone's house and sees little Vivian being punched in the face by some noble woman. He observes what's going on, but no one sees him. That makes his investigation a lot easier. He discovers that the woman who hit little Vivian is the wife of Count Belkin. He watches little Vivian's family from the sidelines and learns a lot about them. Count Belkin sits on his horse. He looks noble. He has a thick beard and mustache on his face. The Belkin family is known for its mastery of the sword, so the Lord wished for a son who could be his successor. However, as the mother gave birth to a girl, tragedy struck. The mother is sitting on the bed, and little Vivian is standing beside her. She brings her mother some food, but knocks the tray over. She looks guilty. The mother looks at her furious, her eyes filled with hatred for the girl. She asks why she gave birth to her. The mother screams at her that she better not have given birth to her. The poor girl stands and stares at her. She is silent. Her eyes are pouring with tears. Her lips are tightened. Little Vivian runs away in tears. Since even her own mother has abandoned her, she has no one left to protect her. The unhappy girl grew into a soulless adult woman. The loneliness and cruelty she endured planted the seeds of madness in her. Vivian remembers being subjected to metal shackles. She was bound hand and foot, her throat bound by thick shackles. She was completely helpless. The more time passed, the more she gave into her madness. She takes great pleasure in killing people. She takes great pleasure in seeing them bleeding, screaming. Vivian is standing bloody on a mountain of bodies. In her hand, she holds the head of one of the boys she killed. Her eyes are on fire. She is insanely happy in this moment. She enjoys it so much that she killed all the teachers and their assistants at the assembly for the 5th year. Andreas comes back to reality from his thoughts. Little Vivian still continues to look at him, tears in her eyes. She's about to cry. Andreas tries to comfort her while telling her that he really wants to help her. Andreas looks at the girl, a look of regret in his eyes. He goes on to tell her that he can help her try to overcome her past so that it doesn't bring her so much pain. Tears rolled from little Vivian's eyes. She cried loudly. She can't believe he really came to help her. She squats down and eagerly tries to see who her savior is. She looks at the chair, but there is no one on it. But someone's voice asks her why she is crying. Wiping away her tears, she explains to the voice that no one has ever tried to help her. Andreas only thinks that he doesn't really know how to behave with children. Little Vivian is red with tears, but she can't stop crying. Andreas's voice tells her that she has a special talent. It's just that no one here has been able to recognize it yet. The girl froze, listening intently to what the voice was telling her. In the palace where the girl lives, a conversation continues between little Vivian and the voice of Andreas. She doesn't believe that she is special, but Andreas tries to convince her that she is. He claims that she has a very special talent for wielding a sword. The girl continues to sit on her knees in front of the chair. She looks at her hands and doesn't understand how this is possible. She has never even picked up a sword before. Andreas, sitting on the chair, reassures her and tells her that the fairy knows many things. Little Vivian has already recovered from her tears. She sits in complete confusion. She says that she is always being scolded. Andreas replies to her that it's okay, he will always be there for her now. She stares mesmerized at the chair. Andreas asks her that in return, she promised him that she will never tell anyone about him. The girl silently agrees. It is a warm, sunny day. At the palace where Vivian and her family live, she promises Andreas that she will not tell anyone about him under any circumstances. Andreas accompanies little Vivian everywhere. When her mother shouts at her again, he stands by her side and comforts her, tries to cheer her up, and asks her not to pay attention to her. Andreas urges her to start practicing with the sword. Little Vivian grows up. She begins practicing swordsmanship diligently with her teacher. She's very good at it. She's holding a shield and learning to defend herself. In her other hand, she holds a sharp sword. Even as little Vivian sleeps, her sword lies beside her, and Andreas carefully guards her sleep and sits beside her at her bedside. It's a hot, sunny summer. The foliage is colored green. Summer is passing. The leaves on the trees begin to take on a golden hue. It begins to get gradually colder. A month passes, and Andreas accompanies little Vivian everywhere. Little Vivian strides determinedly across the grass in her long boots. She walks through the park and calls out to Andreas, calling him a fairy. She can't find him anywhere. She says loudly that she has come to the promised place as they had agreed. Andreas hides behind a tree, arms folded across his chest. He can hear everything. She continues to ask loudly if he will teach her swordsmanship today as well. She looks around, trying to find him with her eyes. Andreas peeks out from behind a tree and admonishes Vivian. He says you can't shout about it everywhere. Little Vivian covers her mouth guiltily with the palm of her hand. Andreas stands in front of her and reminds her that he said no one is allowed to know his identity. Vivian rubs her forehead in confusion. She giggles and tries to steer him away from the subject. She's glad he's found himself. Andreas announces with a serious look that the training is starting. The girl resolutely shouts that it is time to start fighting. Andreas thus spent a whole month with little Vivian. Little Vivian learned to hold and wield a sword with confidence. She began to take great pleasure in wielding the sword. With Andreas's talent of battlemanship of an exceptional level, he tried to give her as much advice as he could as soon as he could. Little Vivian's gaze became much more determined as she learned to stand up for herself. This advice suited her perfectly. She began practicing with the sword with great pleasure and fanaticism. It became the main business of her life. Growing up, Vivian didn't give up doing what she loved to do. Every day she improved her skills in swordsmanship. She is truly a true genius at her craft. Andreas watches admiringly as little Vivian trains. He is amazed that such movements shouldn't belong to a child who only started sword training a month ago. Andreas comes out from behind a tree and tells little Vivian that he now understands why she was praised by her sword teacher. The girl casts her eyes downward. She's upset about something. Her head is downcast. She's silent and does not answer him. Andreas steps closer to her. Little Vivian tries to say something, but can't make up her mind. Andreas looks at her and is perplexed. Up until this point, he thought she was a pretty confident kid. Vivian walks up to the fence. Andreas is standing behind her. He tries to ask her what's wrong, why she is suddenly sad. After all, her movements are perfect. She answers him sadly that it doesn't matter how many times he praises her, because he will never show himself to her. Andreas stiffens at those words. He had not expected that little Vivian would become so attached to him and that she would want to see him so much. He tries to find the words to explain himself. His eyes run in different directions. He's confused. Andreas tries to explain why he is a fairy. The girl, without listening to him, replies that he doesn't show himself to her because she is a bad child. She clutches the sword tightly in her hand and goes on to say that she thought that if she tried, and she would be recognized. She still stands with her back to Andreas and says she tried so hard. Just a little more and she cries. Andreas stands behind her and watches, unable to find the words to comfort little Vivian in any way. She stands with her eyes down and asks him if it's all so futile, no matter how hard she tries. Suddenly, she hears a native voice. It is the voice of her father, Count Belkin. He walks behind, approaching Vivian, and says that he is very surprised by what he saw. The girl stands there with her eyes bulging. She doesn't know what to do or where to run to. Andreas stares in astonishment at Vivian's father approaching. The girl turns to him, a sharp sword in her hand. Count Belkin stops and tells her that he didn't expect his daughter to have such talent, which she has hidden from everyone. The Count asks little Vivian to demonstrate her sword skills once more. The girl still stands there with her eyes bulging. She quickly agrees to his request, unable to refuse her father. It is a beautiful fall day outside. There is not a cloud in the sky. Little Vivian practicing in the park near her home. The girl wields her sword very professionally. All her movements are controlled by her. She swings the sword without much strain. Her face expresses contentment. She is trying to prove to her father that she too is worth something. She is trying to win his approval. Little Vivian has finished and stands silently looking at her father. She is proud of herself. She stands and waits to hear what her father has to say. As expected of little Vivian, everything went flawlessly, for she has Belkin blood in her. The Count says approvingly that it was splendid and walks off in the direction of the palace. Little Vivian looks after him. Her sword is still in her right hand. She certainly hadn't expected praise from her father. Her eyes rounded, her cubes clenched. Andreas stands behind Vivian and looks at her without saying a word. The girl turns to Andreas, still staring after her father as he leaves. She says this is the first time her father has ever praised her. She looks sad. Andreas stands behind her back. Little Vivian hears some kind of crackling. She talks about how she never dreamed of such a thing. Finally, she smiles. Andreas looks questioningly at little Vivian. He can't utter a word. A now adult Vivian stands in front of Andreas. He has a stunned look on his face. She tells him that she really wishes she could stay with Mr. Fairy longer, but it's time for her to wake up. Tears come to Vivian's eyes. She struggles to keep from bursting into tears. Everything around her cracked and shattered like brittle glass. Andreas watches all of this and realizes that she is finally awake. The glass completely cracks and shatters. Only reality remains. Vivian tells Andreas that thanks to him, she has found a path worth following. She smiles shyly, lowering her eyes slightly. Andreas stands silently opposite her. She lets the sheet out of her hands and continues to say that it's better for her to follow this path rather than get stuck in the past. Andreas looks at her approvingly. He is glad that he was able to help a little girl find herself. Andreas slowly walks up to Vivian and addresses her seriously. He holds out his pinky finger to her. She gives hers. Their fingers intertwine. He says, "Our promise." She remembers that she made a promise to Mr. Fay that she would never let up. Andreas asks her to keep that promise forever. They stand holding each other's little fingers. Everything around them rattles and shatters, only they are illuminated by a bright flash of light. She tells him she will keep her promise. Always. Vivian continues to hold Mr. Fay by his little finger and speak words of gratitude to him from the bottom of her heart. The splinters around them crumble away. He showed her a good dream that she will surely follow. Hundreds of shards fall to the ground. They shimmer beautifully as they fly. Andreas sits next to Vivian, who is lying motionless. A circle of purple mana burns around them. Bloodstains from the inhabitants of the city can be seen everywhere. He holds her hand. Vivian lies unconscious. Her eyes are covered. A strand of hair has fallen over her eyes. She doesn't move. Andreas sits on one knee beside her, still holding her pinky finger. She doesn't come to her senses. He thinks about the fact that if it's Vivian, she can handle it, especially if it's the same Vivian as in the dream. Ivy's curator approaches the corpse of the Black Magician. The pool of blood under the Black Magician's body is spreading more and more. Curator Ivy found out that Baron Bullied was responsible for everything that happened in Trim Village. Curator Ivy looks at the Black Mage's body without a drop of pity, Vivian standing a little further away. The curator turns to Andreas and tells him to cut off the Black Mage's head and try not to damage the face. Andreas looks at her judgmentally. Ivy's handler, brimming with anger and hatred, says they're going to Baron Bullied's castle immediately. Andreas, Ivy's handler, and Vivian went there immediately. Andreas thinks about the fact that Curator Ivy's bloodlust is horrifying. He thinks about the fact that Christopher is dead and Hazard is missing. No surprise there. One of the knights in the palace falls to the ground, his helmet flying off. He is horrified at what is happening. The point of the sword approaches his face and he tries to dodge it. His eyes are full of fear, his eyes bulging. Andreas carries Christopher on his back. Vivian slowly rambles after them. The knights surround Ivy, pointing their swords at her. A knight lying on the ground asks them in horror, "Who are they?" Ivy tells them to put their swords away immediately. She continues to speak and introduces herself as Ivy Clare, a teaching assistant at Rodlin Academy from the Knights Department. She says threateningly that from now on, anyone who defends Baron Bullied is guilty of treason and will be executed on the spot. Andreas looks on in horror as she holds Christopher on her back and thinks about the fact that she's not just going to kill everyone, is she? Curator Ivy holds in her hand the severed head of a black mage, the very butler of the Baron. The knights protecting the Baron stare at the head in horror. Ivy's handler raises the butler's bloody severed head high. She asks the knights if they recognize who she is. Her expression is filled with hatred and anger. Ivy's handler continues to sit on one of the knights, holding the butler's head in his hands. The others watch in horror at what is happening. She orders them to lead them to Baron Bullied immediately. The helmeted knights look at her dumbfounded and silently agree. They are approaching the house where Baron Bullied lives. It is a stylish gray building with a blue roof. Ivy's handler, Andreas and Vivian, go inside. Another door kicked in by Ivy is lying on the floor. Andreas and Vivian's eyes widen at what they see. They are completely shocked. Even Ivy's handler is taken aback by what she sees. She stares questioningly. Baron Bullied sits sad and realizes that Evan, his humble butler, is dead. He is sitting on a chair, and next to him, on a huge couch, lies an unusually huge creature. It's disgusting. Tears are streaming down its face, and drool is spurting from its mouth. It's wrapped in rope. The Baron introduces it as his son. The fearsome creature smiles as it raises its head, and the Baron looks at it and continues to talk about how it should have died of the disease a couple months ago. Andreas juxtaposes everything that has been happening and finally realizes why he took the plunge into black magic. He reverently strokes his son and gets up from his chair. He tries to explain to them that while he was looking everywhere for a cure for his illness, he was visited by a man in a robe who said he knew a way to help his son. The Baron turns to his son and looks at him regretfully. He goes on to say that he asked the man in the robe to save his son's life at any cost. The curator, Andreas and Vivian, are stunned listening to what he says without uttering a word. Suddenly, Baron Bullied turned to them and shouted that he agreed to leave his son in such a terrible state, pointing at him with his hand. The horrible creature made an ugly face, tears still streaming down his face. Ivy's handler looks at the Baron with undisguised hatred. Andreas looks at her and realizes that something terrible is about to happen. The Baron looks at his son. His gaze is full of love and regret for him. The bogeyman looks at his father. The Baron addresses him by the name Adel. The Baron falls to his knees before him and begs him to forgive his foolish father. Curator Ivy walks angrily towards the Baron, a sharp sword in her hands. Andreas and Vivian remain behind. Ivy grabs him by the scruff of the neck. The Baron's head is down. He doesn't even try to resist. The curate throws the Baron to the floor in a frenzy. He flies off. She, full of hatred for him, tells him to say these words to the people he and his butler mutilated. Baron Bullied is lying on the floor. It is difficult and painful for him to move. The knights stand beside him, but do not approach to help him up. They are afraid of Ivy themselves. The curator angrily instructs Andreas to go and get a team of investigators now, and tells the knights to get rid of that monster from behind immediately. They unhesitatingly agree. Andreas creates a sharp stone spear in his hand, with a deft movement of his hand. He grabs it and immediately throws it at the monster, Baron Bullied's son. Vivian stands back and watches what Andreas is doing. Baron Bullied is still lying on the floor. He looks up and sees that his son is about to be killed. His eyes are full of horror and despair. The stone spear flies and hits the eye of the huge monster. It wrinkles in pain. Ivy's handler looks at him in disgust. Baron Bullied stands helplessly looking at what is happening. He can do nothing but speak his son's name. The knights standing behind look on in horror at everything that is happening. They are very far from the Baron. The Baron runs up to his son and slides to his knees, holding on to him. The others watch from the sidelines. The huge monster remains without one eye. He's dead. Ivy's handler turns to Andreas and asks why he did it without her instruction. Andreas explains that the spawns of black magic must be disposed of immediately before they can make any sudden moves. He goes on to say, with a serious look, that any information should be in Baron Bullied's hands. A team of Imperial investigators arrest the Baron and place him in a closed cart and drive him away. A dead, huge monster lies on a cart ripped open with its back up. One of the investigative team is studying it. Andreas and Vivian are back at the academy. They are seated at the table, having been invited to take testimony. Apparently, Baron Bullied has been cooperating with the Black Magician. The majestic Rodlin Academy blends in perfectly with the landscape behind it, the mountains. Andreas and Vivian listen carefully to what they are told. One of the Academy investigators says to bring the Baron in. They want to hold another hearing. One of the investigators, who appears to be in charge, thanks Andreas and Vivian for their time, and, pointing to the door, tells them they can go home. Standing a little farther away from him is a man in a robe. Andreas and Vivian are heading towards the dormitory. This is the end of their assignment. They walk down the stairs in silence. Vivian walks a little ahead of Andreas. They walk in silence. Each is thinking about his own thoughts. One thing is clear. Baron Bullied will be severely punished after his involvement in black magic. Andreas turns back to the academy and thinks about the fact that the Baron should thank him, because if he hadn't killed his son, he would have suffered. Andreas imagines a huge monster lying there unable to make any movements because he is bound. Standing over him are the distraught citizens of the town. They want him dead because they have become this way because of this monster and his father. Andreas asks in his head about Mr. Fia guessing everything, doesn't he? Vivian interrupts his thoughts. She begins to tell him about Baron Edel's son. Andreas waits intently for what she has to say next. He introduces Vivian as a little girl. She asks him about something he wouldn't want Edel to suffer, right? Her eyes are sincere and wide open. She's childlike and naive. He comes back to the present and asks Vivian what she's talking about. He realizes that he just almost spoke like a fairy. Vivian looks at him and says he sounds just like Mr. Fay. Suddenly they hear someone running after them. They turn around. It is Lucia running and calling out to Andreas. She looks animated and asks if they are done with their business. Andreas answers her that yes, the investigator said the hearing is over. Vivian stands behind him wide-eyed. By now, everyone knows everything. She happily shows them something on a tablet. Andreas and Vivian look at the screen nonchalantly. Lucia shows them that they are all over the news and enthusiastically tells them that they are now celebrities. The screen shows their faces and writes that the Rodlin Academy students have defeated the Black Magician. They get top marks. Lucius goes on and on about how it hasn't been long since she and Andreas introduced their potion. Andreas interrupts her speech and says that right now he would just like some peace and quiet. Vivian stands silently by his side. Lucia speaks excitedly about what she has heard, that they will receive an award. She raises her hand high. She asks to take them out to eat. Andreas stops her and tells her that the reward should be divided equally among all those involved in the task. He thinks of Lucia trying to ruin him. Lucia looks at him questioningly and stops talking. Suddenly, Lucia, pointing nor Vivian, asks him if they were standing next to him on the news. Andreas looks at her and asks about her only now noticing her. He introduces her and says she is a student in the Knights Division course. The girl guiltily introduces herself as Lucia Everlast and says it is a pleasure to meet her. Vivian introduces herself as well. Andreas apologizes to Vivian for Lucia and says she's a bit silly. Lucia doesn't give up. She keeps insisting that they will still get the money and they need to go out to dinner immediately and celebrate the success of their potion. Andreas thinks about how persistent she is and how much she's getting on his nerves. The tall building of Rodlin's magic tower can be seen among the trees. There isn't a cloud in the sky. The weather is clear and warm. Lucia turns around and tells Andreas that she will see him at the magic tower tomorrow and leaves. Andreas tells her that he will not forgive her if she is late again. In the distance, you can see the magical tower of Rodlin. It's very tall. A road leads to it. Andreas walks down the road, carrying Lucia on his back. He curses at her and says that he knew it would end like this. Andreas looks angry. He scolds himself and calls himself a fool for trusting Lucia again. She laughs loudly, sitting on his back. Andreas runs towards the magic tower. Lucia begs him pitifully to go slower. Lucius holds Andreas tightly by the neck. He walks with a nonchalant face. They have already reached the gate of the tower. Vivian continues to laugh out loud, amused by what is happening. They enter the tower where they are greeted by a guy with glasses. He makes sure it's them by calling out names and tells them to follow him. Lucius is hanging out in Andreas's arms. He freaks out. They walk up the stairs, following a guy with glasses. The space of the magic tower is constantly changing, and they should watch their step. There are many stairs all around. Everything is noisy and twirling. Andreas turns to Lucia and tells her to walk properly. They walk down the stairs, and Lucia catches Andreas off guard with her question. She asks about their relationship with Vivian, whom she saw yesterday. Andreas replies to her with a nonchalant face that he and Vivian don't have much of a relationship. Lucius looks at him suspiciously. He doesn't understand why he's asking or why she even cares. They keep going somewhere up the stairs behind a guy with glasses. Lucia insists that they should definitely go out to dinner. Andreas indignantly replies to her that she's rich and asks her why she keeps begging him to buy her a meal. Andreas and Lucius look at each other dumbfounded. They realize whose voice it is. Suddenly, they are grabbed by the shoulders by a man with a yellow bandage on his head. There's no way they were expecting this. Everything sparkles with golden light. A huge eagle with giant wings flies over the man. Andreas walks quickly with a confident gait. His steps are resolute. Andreas looks around, stopping his attention on the man. He looks him over. This man is the owner of Rodlin's magical tower, Bart Alwyn. A magical eagle flies everywhere next to him, illuminating everything with its wings with a golden light. The guy with the glasses turns around and shouts, "Tower Master," with an exclamation. The man continues to stand next to Andreas and Lucia. The owner of the tower stands with his eyes bandaged. A huge raven sits on his shoulder with its head bowed. He turns to Andreas and freezes. His hands are folded at his waist. He looks unfazed. Lucius stares at him, dumbfounded. The man says that his son really does have such a dumb and unchanging face. He smiles slyly. Bart Alwyn is the head of House Alwyn and the current master of the Rodlin Tower of Magic. Andreas bowed his head. He ponders that isn't the personal appearance of the Tower Master stripping the Tower Master? He feels irritated after the insults said to him. Bart Alwyn looks arrogantly at Lucia. He is dressed in an off-white manitia with gold inlays. He asks her about being Viscount Hollington's daughter. She bows to him, says yes, and introduces herself as Lucia Everlast. The Tower Master indignantly says that if they want people to remember their names, they need to build a proper reputation. Andreas resents his pompousness, and Lucius timidly agrees with what he says. He goes on to say that he will be in charge from now on. He sharply indicates to the guy with the glasses with his hand to move away from them immediately. The eagle still continues to fly beside him. Andreas looks up at the Tower Buster and thinks about something. Lucius stands not far from him. The girl, covering her mouth with her hands so that Bart Alwyn wouldn't hear, tells Andreas that he is indeed a monster for being able to use such complex and multi-component spatial magic. She feels like he's deliberately exaggerating. The Tower Master says he can also hear them whispering. There's an undisguised superiority on his face. Everything around you is spinning and spinning. There is a humming sound that gives me a slight thrill. The glowing streaks spread throughout the tower room. The Tower Master, Andreas, Lucia, and the guy with glasses are standing in the middle of the magic hall. They are illuminated by huge, light yarugas. 3 judges are seated in front of them. Right in front of them is a small table with a bottle of potion on it. The judges were dumbfounded by the appearance of the Tower Master himself. They opened their mouths wide. These people are sitting in black robes. The Master, ignoring their reactions, asks if the potion testing has passed or is still in progress. One of the men replies that they have just finished testing the potion's effectiveness. The Tower Master picks up the potion and scrutinizes it. One of the men in the robe goes on to say that all that remains is to question the creators about their methods of making it. The Tower Master tastes the potion straight from the neck. He swallows the liquid. He thoughtfully begins to list what the potion is brewed from: mohaima leaves, essence of the todor tree, jahaz fruit, and peony mushroom. He looks at the bottle with interest. Andreas and Lucius continue to stand silently behind him. The Tower Master turns back to Lucia and clarifies, "Was anything else added to the potion?" Lucia bows her head and says quietly that more hampis extract and matarata root have been added. The Tower Master jumps and ends up right next to her. He says it's interesting. One of the men says excitedly that rumors have reached him, but it is unthinkable that this girl could create such potions at her age. The Tower Master looks at Lucia from head to toe with a sly smile on his face. The Tower Master tells the men in robes that since the examination is over, it must be approved. Andreas watches silently and listens intently. The Tower Master flies up above them, puzzled as to what Cromwell's son is doing here after all. Lucius and Andreas look down at him. Andreas looks at him reproachfully, continuing not to make a sound. The Tower Master holds his chin and says that on paper, the potion is registered as a common project. He's sure Andreas was just messing around with Lucia. Andreas is still as silent as ever. His gaze betrays nothing but hatred for this man. Lucius and Vivian are silent. She casts a glance at Andreas. He pays no attention to her. Lucius looks up and tells the Tower Master that without Andreas, she wouldn't have been able to create this potion. The Tower Master can't believe it, but Lucia keeps pushing the point. She says that Andreas did most of the work and that she was just helping him. The Master still doubts this and sighs. He says he will make sure of it. The Tower Master clicks his long fingers of his right hand ringingly. Lucius guesses and tells Andreas that the Tower Master most likely can't use this magic outside the tower. Andreas doesn't answer her anything. He only thinks about the fact that even now she is analyzing. At the snap of the Tower Master's fingers, the experimentation room opens up in front of them. Several students are brewing something at tables. The Tower Master tells Andreas to brew the same potion right here, right now. All the necessary ingredients are in the cupboard. Andreas immediately gets to work. He is absolutely sure of his abilities and wants to prove to the Tower Master that he is not just a toady. The Tower Master and several other warders stand right above him and watch his every move. Andreas looks at the table where a whole lot of chemical equipment is. If he uses something he's not familiar with, it could be a problem for him. He decides to use only the equipment he is familiar with and has worked with personally. It was exactly 5 minutes. Andreas has prepared the potion. The Tower Master tastes it. He walks up to Andreas and says that he recognizes that he brewed the potion correctly. Lucia stands behind Andreas and remains silent. She knew he would have no problem doing this. There are people watching them from the sidelines with interest. The Tower Master says that now they need to get to the questions. He asks Andreas why he used hampis in his potion. Thinking slightly, he doesn't immediately give an answer. He is a little confused. Standing next to the table where the experiments are taking place, Andreas begins to explain to the Tower Master that he used hampis to get rid of the side effects and increase the potion's effectiveness. The students standing in the surroundings whisper admiringly among themselves. Lucy is completely shocked. She's amazed that Andreas can explain things well and accurately. The Tower Master interrupts him and says that's enough. But Andreas is outraged. He says he's not done explaining. The man removes the yellow blindfold from his eyes. He wants to get a good look at Andreas. Andreas stares indifferently at the Tower Master. His gaze betrays no emotion, his eyes empty. He comes as close as he can to Andreas. He leans back in surprise. The Tower Master tells him that even though they haven't seen each other for a long time, the kid he knew couldn't have created something like this. He gazes into his face and tries to find an answer there. His eyes glow with a blue light. He asks Andreas who he is. Lucia looks at them questioningly. She wonders if they really know each other. The man continues to glare at Andreas. He stares back at him and remains silent. Andreas looks at him and tries to find the words to start answering him. His face takes on a satisfied expression. A smirk appears on his lips. He looks at him arrogantly and asks him about the fact that he is joking, or is he serious? He says confidently that he is definitely Andreas Cromwell. The smile is gone from his face. He goes on to say that he is the same Andreas Cromwell whom the Tower Master had constantly mocked as if he were an insect. The Tower Master gazes intently into Andreas's face. He stares at him unfazed. The Tower Master tells him that he has become quite an interesting guy. Lucius stands behind Andreas and doesn't say a word. The Tower Master smiles slyly at Andreas and offers him a wager. His eyes are filled with rage. Andreas looks at him questioningly and doesn't understand what he's talking about. The Tower Master tells him that if he invents another cure this year and brings it to him, the Tower Master will pay off the Cromwell family's debt. Andreas was dumbfounded by these words. He opened his eyes wide, for he had not expected him to propose such a... The Tower Master puts the bandage back on his face. As he does so, he says that he will also grant him one more wish. He goes on to say that if he can't do it, he will have to leave Rodlin Academy. Andreas looks at him seriously. He's thinking about it. Lucia is shocked that Andreas might be expelled from the academy. The Tower Master persistently asks Andreas if he agrees or not. Andreas is silent. Andreas is absolutely confident in his abilities. He pierces the Tower Master with his gaze. He closes his eyes and smiles. He thinks about how harsh the conditions are, but he agrees to this bet. Andreas puts his hand to his heart and bows his head. He realizes that as heir to the Cromwell family, he cannot refuse such an offer. The Tower Master looks at him. The Tower Master smiles and tells Andreas that he will hope he can really get results since he is so confident. The Tower Master's eyes can be seen through the blindfold. Memories arise in his mind. The image of his father appears in front of Andreas. They look very much alike. The father smiles kindly. Andreas's father smiles and looks at the Tower Master. He has long greenish hair and looks very noble. In the Tower Master's mind, images of Father Andreas and his two small children appear. They are having fun and giggling loudly. It is Andreas and his little sister. He talks about what he will be looking forward to. Behind the bars lies a vampire girl. Her time is running out, seconds to go. The shackles on her arms begin to emit a bright red light. She begins to rise. The vampire girl slowly rises to her feet. All light surrounds the space of the prison cell. Her long red hair hangs down and drags across the floor. She stares detachedly at her hands, which are engulfed in light. Her hands are twisted. There's an explosion of tremendous force. Everything sparkles. You can't see a thing. The vampire girl breaks the wall with incredible ease. Now there are no barriers in front of her. She is free from shackles and bars. The vampire girl stares off into the distance at a building in the distance, thinking about something. Suddenly, she remembers their conversation with Andreas. Her lips press together. He sees Andreas in front of him, who insisted she swear on his family's name. The vampire girl laughed furiously so that her sharp fangs became visible. She recalls the face of Andreas, who said she had to swear she wouldn't kill him. Her eyes are bloodshot. She's laughing bloodily. There is only one thought in her mind. Andreas. Cromwell's information scroll appears, a review of the Great Sin. An ancient scroll depicts a petrel. It is a spiritual monster with high intelligence that can control lightning and wind even in play. To get one as a pet is an incredibly difficult task. It's evening at Rodlin Academy. It's warm outside. Many students are out in the courtyard. Andreas sits on the bench with one hand resting on the box. He thinks about the fact that he has been partially reimbursed for the cost of the ingredients, so his need for money has subsided a bit. He sits on a bench with students sitting next to him on either side of him. He keeps thinking that as long as he can brew potions, he can fully concentrate on training. Andreas's gaze is full of determination. He realizes that right now the problem for him is the page of idleness. He and a few other students take the train. Andreas is musing about the fact that he can't find a way to get value out of her. He realizes that he should perhaps trade her for something he badly needs right now. His head is slightly down, his gaze directed downward. He realizes that there's no avoiding it. He remembers Karen's angry face and realizes he'll have to use it. The sky has turned a purple color. The clouds become dark. Takes on a bright yellow hue. Clouds float slowly across the sky. The train creaks to a halt on the platform. Everything is illuminated by the rays of the setting sun. Andreas and a few students get out of the train car and head somewhere. Andreas walks with a confident gait. His steps are resolute. His robe sways on him. Only the steady stomping of his feet can be heard. He's walking and talking about something. His eyes are full of determination. Suddenly, something interrupts his thoughts. He feels that someone is watching him. He looks around. There is no one near him. Andreas approaches the gates of a beautifully brick building. His step slows. He continues to feel someone's presence near him. He looks around cautiously. A vampire girl sits on a branch and watches him. She is dressed in a black robe with a hood on her head. Andreas wonders if he's imagining things or if someone is actually following him. He holds a box of ingredients in his hands. The vampire girl chuckles gloatingly. She's glad she was able to track him down. Andreas sits at the table. In front of him is Heron, who takes a seat on the couch. Heron, not hiding his dislike, tells Andreas reproachfully that the star of the academy has finally condescended to visit him. You can hear the reproach in his voice. Heron holds the potion bottle in his hands and scrutinizes it. His face is a little twisted. Andreas tells him that he has come to report to him right after the last examination. Heron tells Andreas, puzzled, that he has been studying this potion in secret from him and is now acting like a diligent student. He is confused. Andreas guiltily replies to him that he didn't plan it. Karen presses the book and shuts Andreas up. He tells them to come to him and not to complain. A magical space opens up in front of him. He tells Andreas that he will imbue him with what it means to be his apprentice. Andreas obediently follows him and thinks about the fact that Heron takes offense at such a small thing and thinks him a cheapskate. They go down a long, spiral staircase to somewhere below. Heron holds a glowing circle in his hands. Andreas follows in silence, realizing that this does not seem to be the time to bring it up. Andreas watches Heron's demeanor carefully and realizes that he can't talk to him right now while he's in a bad mood. Heron has an angry look on his face. Andreas thinks about the fact that he will have to settle for checking on the vampire's condition. They go down into the room and see that the whole place is trashed, the wall destroyed. There are ruins from collapsed walls all around. Dust has been kicked up. Piles of stones are lying everywhere. Charon stands in a complete daze. He didn't expect to see such a thing. They see that the entire room where the experiments took place has been completely flattened to the ground. Boulders are lying around. Tables have been destroyed. Andreas, seeing all this, realizes that the evolution has been successful. His gaze betrays no emotion. They approach the cell where the vampire girl was sitting and find it empty. They realize that she's the one who made the mess. Andreas stays in the doorway and thinks about how sorry he is that they won't meet her again, because she was a good example. Heron squats down and tries to see something in the cell. Charon picks up the chains that bound the vampiress and shouts horrifying words. He is outraged beyond belief. His face is full of anger and rage. He clutched the chain with beastly strength. Every muscle in his face is tense, his teeth clenched. Charon squats with his back to Andreas and addresses him by name. Charon's eyes are bloodshot. He, trying to hold back his anger, asks Andreas about something he did to Angela's vampire girl shackles. Andreas lowers his head and answers him that no, he feared for his life. He looks at Charon nonchalantly and thinks about what an idiot he is. Andreas smiles slyly. Charon still continuing to stand with his back to him. They realize that she is only a hybrid. Heron holds open the shackles in which the vampiress had recently been imprisoned. Andreas chuckles gloatingly behind his back and thinks to himself, serves him right. Charon swung his chains angrily. His mouth opened wide. His eyes became furious. Every vein in his face tensed. The impact happens with such force that the clanking of the chains can be heard even on the stairs. Andreas is rapidly moving away from the building where the meeting with Charon took place. It is already dark outside. 3 bright moons still shine in the sky. Andreas stops, his face pensive. He thinks about what he will bring to the page of idleness another time. Suddenly, someone's long red hair comes down over Andreas's head. He doesn't notice them right away. He hears a familiar female voice say his name. His eyes widen and his pupils constrict. He immediately realizes who is speaking. His hair falls lower and lower, and he begins to tremble with fear. Angela hangs from a tree, holding onto a branch with one hand. With her other hand, she holds Andreas by the chin. Her eyes speak with a bright red light. Andreas is dumbfounded and can't move. He guessed that she was the one waiting for him in the ambush. Gently holding his chin, she tells him that she has wanted to ask him something since she woke up. Andreas continues to stare off into the distance. The vampire girl looks at him slyly, smiling. She asks him to look at her. Andreas resolutely turns around on her and looks directly into her eyes. His gaze is slightly frightened. She looks at him and says he is a good boy. She asks him to tell her about the power she has received. Andreas asks her perplexed, why is she doing this? He has kept his word after all. He reminds her that she must know the price for breaking her oath in her family's name. Angela closes her eyes. Her face is peaceful. She smiles slightly. She looks mysterious. Pink mana starts to emanate from her. She talks about knowing it all too well, but can't resist asking him something. Andreas continues to look at her questioningly. It's in the middle of the woods. There are gloomy trees all around. It's already completely dark. The vampiress strikes a flirtatious pose. She keeps telling him that she couldn't break free of the shackles with her own power, no matter how hard she tried, so she found another way. She gently holds Andreas's shoulder and approaches him. She asks him if he has guessed the method in question. Suddenly, she smells something from Andreas. It's like a great sin. Her eyes rounded. Her expression changed to a sly smile. Now she began to realize what it was. Andreas looks at her perplexed. His eyes are wide, his lips tight. Angela giggles and moves closer to him. She strokes his face and says it's interesting. Andreas asks her what she's carrying. He is still as nonchalant and doesn't fall for her tricks. Angela grabs him sharply by the back of the neck so that he catches his breath. His mouth is open, and he tries to inhale, but he can't do it very well. She, without much effort, presses him against a huge tree with a thick trunk. Andreas tries greedily to breathe. He tries his best to pull her clawed hand away from his neck, but he fails. She clutched at him, trying to strangle him. With her other hand, Angela makes an indicating gesture. Her head is pulled down. She tells him that there's a lot of things she wanted to ask him about, but this place is too conspicuous, so she'll have to stop for now. Her face expresses contentment. She fixes her hair, which has fallen in front of her face. With her other hand, she still holds Andreas by the throat. He tries to get away from her hand. She continues to say that they will meet again soon. She looks at him with a crazed look and smiles gloatingly. She says that she will find a good use for this power in the meantime, and since he helped her, she can't resist thanking him. Andreas gritted his teeth. His gaze is filled with fear and hopelessness. He doesn't understand the power in question. She, trying to reassure him, tells him not to worry, for she will not make him suffer. She sticks out her long tongue. Sharp fangs show from her mouth. She wants to lick him. At that moment, she says that Andreas could be her destined partner. Cromwell's information scroll appears, which is called an overview of the world of the Great Sin. An ancient scroll has the remains of some kind of animal painted on it. When the Great Sin was just a game, only useful materials were given to him. However, now that the game has become a reality, he has to deal with raw materials. The stately white building with gold inserts looks very expensive. It is a hostel of illusion. It is a warm, sunny day. On the balcony of the second floor, two girls are talking at the table. They are eating various delicious things and chatting nicely about something. A dark-haired girl holds a book and points her finger at the image, showing it to her companion. The page shows knights in armor. Her gaze is full of admiration. They are discussing this book. The dark-haired girl talks about then Lord Philippe, armed with a one-handed sword. The girl named Ulich, sitting across from her, is visibly bored. She, rubbing her face with a napkin, turns to a dark-haired girl named Dean and asks her to stop preaching for just a little while. Diane replies to her that if she tries hard enough, she too will find a knight she can cheer for. There are porcelain dishes with picturesque ornaments on the table. The tea in the mug is already cold. Ulich, deciding to change the subject, tells her that she has heard that Lucia Everplast has passed the examination at the magic school. Diane is delighted by this and amazed that at such an age she was able to make such a sensation. Dean brings the mug of tea to her mouth and imagines in her head the image of Lucia as she fell asleep on the book. She thinks about the fact that she's heard that Lucia is lazy, but it looks like she's really talented, a real slumbering dragon. Dehan annoyingly resents the fact that it's so cool, and regrets that she didn't think of it when she was a freshman. Julik looks admiringly at the tablet and exclaims that the most marvelous thing was all this. She turns the tablet with the screen toward Dien and shows a picture of Lucia, Andreas, the Tower Master, and one of the committee members. The girl's gaze is brimming with admiration. She asks Dien if she can believe it. Diane's gaze is full of surprise. She's shocked at what she has just seen. She speaks Andreas Cromwell's name. Lucius, Andreas, the Tower Master, and one of the commissioners pose for a news photo. Andreas is holding the potion they brewed. They zoom in so close that only Andreas remains in the image. Ulich says it's inconceivable that someone so untalented managed to help create the potion. She says that when she first heard the news, she too thought it was a lie. Diane stares at the screen, but her thoughts are immersed in memories. She remembers what Andreas was like as a child when he was just a boy. She remembers that after his family fell, all he did was blame circumstances and lack of talent. Diane looks down at the pages of the book in front of her and can't get comfortable. She thinks about how impossible it is that now he has suddenly achieved something on his own. She remembers Andreas sitting in front of her in the train car. She wonders if this trash has really changed. Ulick admiringly continues to talk about, to think Andreas, the king of parasites himself, has achieved something like this. There is undisguised admiration on her face. Diane stands up and heads away from her. Diane's gaze is full of determination. On her shoulder is a bird of prey with red eyes. She decides she needs to see for herself. Students are gathering in the lecture hall. There is no one in the lecturer's seat yet. Andreas sits wrapped in a scarf, looking sickly. Lucia looks at him and asks why he is wearing so many clothes. He covers his mouth with the scarf and says he is not feeling well. They sit a little farther apart. She keeps up with his questions and keeps asking him, then why is he here and not resting? He indifferently explains to her that he needs to attend enough classes to graduate. The hall door opens and Professor Woban, wearing glasses, enters. Professor Vauban walks confidently towards the blackboard. The students follow him closely. Andreas remembers what happened last night. All he thinks about is that no one should see the huge scar on his neck. That's why he wrapped himself up so he wouldn't attract attention. Andreas recalls the moment the vampiress latched onto his neck and bit him. He thinks about her words, what she said about a destined partner and some other scent. He is at a complete loss for words. He starts to sweat. He's getting really hot from putting too much on, but his thoughts are still focused on the fact that Angela just suddenly bit him and disappeared. Suddenly, Professor Vauban interrupts his train of thought with his voice. He asks the students if everyone has come. They answer yes. Professor Vauban decides to begin his lecture. He is wearing glasses and you can't see his eyes. He is serious about giving the lecture. Andreas sits at his desk, but his thoughts are far away. His eyes stare into nothing. Among the crowd of students, Professor Vauban notices Andreas's face, his expression betraying surprise, his eye twitching. He remembers that it was him who had been written about in the newspapers. Professor Vauban addresses Andreas by name and asks him why he is wearing so many clothes. Is he sick? Andreas coughed on purpose and covered his mouth with a scarf. He answers the professor that he has a cold. Professor Vauban states that he's probably tired of him researching potions and tells him that he's already marked him as present for class and lets him leave. Andreas rises from his seat and thanks the professor. He stands up and looks at Professor Vauban. At this moment, he thinks about how he is a little hurt that he is being let out of class. After coughing a bit, the professor tells Andreas that he asked him, a professor of medical herbalism, for advice and, probably forgetting, failed to mention his name. Andreas stares wide-eyed at Professor Vauban and thinks about the fact that he has invested nothing in his work and wants an award. Now that's chutzpah. Andreas stops and tells Professor Vauban that he is very grateful for his advice. All the students look on in silence at what is happening, and the professor stares intently at Andreas. Andreas goes on to say that he is especially grateful for the professor's advice about the extract of hampis and matarata root. He recalls that the professor told him that if he added them, he would be making soup instead of potions. However, this soup was excellent. She wonders if Andreas is really getting confrontational. Her eyes are wide, and you can see the excitement in them. Professor Vauban's eyes became embittered. His lips tightened. He was totally outraged. No student had ever spoken to him like that before. The students, hearing Andreas's words, began to whisper amongst themselves, looking at Andreas judgmentally. All eyes of the students are on Andreas. They are completely shocked at what he is doing. Andreas confidently heads for the exit. The professor behind the podium shouts indignantly that he is forgetting himself. Without turning around to look at him, he tells him that since he doesn't feel well, he's leaving. Professor Vauban is indignant to the extreme. He is amazed that Andreas talks to him coldly, and there is no gratitude from him for his labor. He loudly pronounces the name Andreas Cromwell. Andreas, ignoring the professor's shout, had already approached the door. He's very pleased with himself. He proudly thinks about the fact that they all used to ridicule him before, but now that he has achieved something, they are all playing friendly. He opens the door and walks out. At this point, he smirks and thinks about how now let them all shut up and kiss his shoes. He realizes that he can just take another class if he needs the points. Professor Woban stares furious at Andreas and thinks to himself, how long is he going to ignore him? Suddenly, one of the students calls out to him. He turns toward them and sees that Lucia Everplast is called out to him. He looks at her perplexed. Lucia rises from her seat and informs the professor that she too was involved in the creation of the potion and can explain everything. Andreas freezes in the doorway and thinks indignantly about what Lucius is doing. Lucia's eyes are innocent. She looks at the professor wide-eyed and waits for him to answer. Professor Vauban clears his throat, covering his mouth with his hand, and approvingly allows her to do so. Andreas looks at her with a judgmental look. He has no idea what she wants to tell him. Lucia excitedly begins to tell them that they learned the basics of potions in this class, and then we put them into practice. All the students look at her and listen attentively. Professor Vauban listened to her story. He is all nervous, sweat beading on his face. His face looks confused. The students stare at her wide-eyed, unable to hide their delight. Lucia smugly concludes her story by saying that their conclusion is that doing their own research without anyone else's help means a great deal. She asks the professor a direct question about the fact that, isn't it their duty as magicians? Professor Vauban's face changes instantly. He looks pleased. Lucia's answer satisfied her completely. He agrees with her opinion and smiles. Andreas, stopping at the door, looks at the professor's reaction. He looks at Professor Woban and realizes that Lucia has just overpowered Professor Woban. He stands there in shock. Lucius nods kindly and says they'll ask him for light next time if he's not too busy with his own research. Professor Woban, stammering and smiling happily, replies to Lucia that they can always go to him for advice. He turns to Andreas and waves his hand. At this point, he turns to him and tells him to take care and wishes him a good journey. Andreas looks at Lucia with gratitude. He pulls his scarf down slightly because he is very stuffy. He mentally tells Lucia that she has just de-escalated the situation magnificently. Lucia, as if hearing his words, puts her hand to her head and winks at him happily. Andreas smiles good-naturedly. He still does, turning to Lucia, thinking about the fact that he still doesn't know why, but thanks her. He creaks open the study room door and walks out. He is very grateful to Lucia for being able to change the outcome of the situation for the better. It's a beautiful sunny day. Thousands of people are out on the street, cars are driving along the road. In the distance, a building can be seen against a background of high hills. The white building is illuminated by bright sunlight. The windows of the building are framed in gold. Inside the large hall, a big, red-haired man with a mustache sits at a table. Standing next to him is his assistant. He is reporting on potential candidates for recruitment. He decides that he will be the first to provide an answer about the students already enrolled in the academy. This muscular Wu-Ango officer is named Duke Cloche Sinclair and is a master of aura. He is holding a clipboard and looking at it puzzled. His facial expression takes on a satisfied look. He looks at the tablet screen and asks the assistant about the fact that Everlast's daughter has created a new type of potion, and it's being brought out for sale. The girl looks at the Duke with a serious look and says, "That's right. They called it Everlast Potion and are currently monopolizing sales." Duke Cloche Sinclair is sitting in a chair and asks the assistant if they have a sample of this potion. She says yes, a sample is available. In his hands is a small bottle of the very same potion. He feels like it is too little. He is amazed that if Lucia created such a thing, being only a freshman. He is sure that many will try to recruit her after their academy graduation. He tastes the potion. The assistant says with a nonchalant face that this is why they need to contact her now. Duke Cloche Sinclair replies to her that they should and tells her to check if there are others who have their eye on her. Duke clenches his fist tightly and looks at him. His face looks pleased. The girl looks at him carefully and asks what he can tell if any abilities have begun to manifest. He looks admiringly at his big fist, which is crunching with unimaginable strength. He says, "That's amazing." The assistant admiringly tells the Duke that this potion is several times more effective than anything on the market and has no side effects. If they can get it on the market, it will revolutionize the market. The assistant fingers the tablet screen with a report on the potion and says that it was co-created. The screen shows a picture of Andreas Cromwell and some characteristics about him. Duke Cloche Sinclair looks at the screen and asks his assistant about being Kane Cromwell's son. He clarifies with her if he had a talent for potions from the beginning. He is a little perplexed. The assistant raises her index finger up and replies to him that it doesn't look like he had talent, and there are also rumors that he took advantage of her. Duke Cloche Sinclair asks the assistant that perhaps there was some reason to include him as a co-author. The assistant replies that there was not, as one of the houses has no notable relationship with the other. The man laughs joyfully. He is pleased that the potion has given him unimaginable strength. He says that all this should be investigated, and if it turns out that Andreas Cromwell has awakened a talent, he should add it to the recruitment list. The assistant behind him replies that she understands and will do as he says. She writes everything down on a sheet of paper so that she doesn't miss anything important later. A dim light shines through the gold-framed window. The sunset is visible outside the window. A stately man is sitting on a chair, sipping red wine from a glass, with a man behind him. He asks him how the year-end award ceremony is going. The gray-haired man standing behind him announces that everything is going exactly as planned and that the Cromwell family will be demoted. He addresses the man sitting in the chair, calling him Your Majesty." The seated man chuckles gloatingly. The man swirls his wineglass in his hand and inhales its aroma with pleasure. He utters only one name, Andreas Cromwell. He chuckles maliciously, his white, even teeth showing through his thick beard and mustache. His eyes are filled with rage and cunning. The expression on his face is slightly frightening. He looks out the window where Andreas's silhouette appears. The man looks forward to seeing how different Andreas is from his father. Andreas's room is visible through the window in the dormitory. He is still practicing his sword skills diligently. He is diligently practicing to wield the sword well. He's only focused on that. He takes a swing of his sword. His physical form has become more trim. His body has gained relief. He swings his sword with all his might. He controls every stroke. Andreas collapses to the floor, exhausted. He frantically tries to catch his breath. He picks up the bottle of potion they brewed with Lucia from the table. Without a second's hesitation, Andreas drinks the contents of the bottle. He realizes that without them, it would not have been possible. His body gradually begins to fill with strength. The regeneration potion increases the recovery rate of his muscles, and the healing potion relieves his fatigue. By adding a physical enhancement potion, he actually created a system for endless training. Andreas holds 2 potion bottles in his hands. He realizes that it was a risk, but evolution was his right choice. At first, he felt strongly about it, but after a while, he decided to improve them after all, since the risk was quite low. The electronic scoreboard pops up with data about Andreas Cromwell. He is granted a bonus-type potions evolution. His chance of success is 89%. Andreas chooses the option to start the evolution process. Andreas stands in front of the electronic scoreboard in confusion. It reads that the bonus-type potions evolution has been successfully completed. His talent, bonus-type potions evolution, has been upgraded to bonus-type potions evolution. Andreas mixes all the potions into a large flask. The created potion takes on a purple color and shimmers slightly with a pearlescent sheen. Holding the flasks in his hands, in front of Andreas, an electronic scoreboard reads that he has created a low-level, invigorating potion. He realizes that he can now create more potions, and his chance of success and brew speed have also increased significantly. Andreas imagines a multitude of colorful potion bottles in his head. He thinks about the fact that as long as things keep going the way they are going, and as long as he keeps putting himself out there, he will be able to grow successfully. Andreas looks away tiredly. If he can find a good corpse and a couple items he needs, he won't have to worry about his battle power. He realizes that as long as Heron is missing somewhere, he can't sell him a page of idleness. Andreas walks up to the door of Heron's house. There is a sign hanging on the big door that says Heron Deeprin is away on urgent business. Andreas thinks about how Heron is in such a bad mood that he left to travel and didn't even tell him. Andreas goes to take a shower. He comes out of there, rubbing his head with a towel, and realizes that he has no connections besides Karen. He immediately tries to calm himself down and go to bed, since he has a medical herbalism class tomorrow morning. Morning comes. Andreas arrived at the academy and walked into the auditorium where the medical herbalism class is usually held. To his surprise, the auditorium is completely empty. There is not a single student. He sees that there is some kind of note hanging on the blackboard. A note announces that today's class will be held outside, which all students have been notified of on their tablets. Andreas curses indignantly at Dr. Woban. He guesses that he is using this specifically against Andreas, since he knows he doesn't have the tablet. Professor Woban's sly look arises in Andreas's mind. He set this whole thing up on purpose. Andreas holds his head in confusion. He has no choice but to hurry to the class he is already late for. Andreas is quickly headed to class outside. He is angry. Stomping his feet, he walks in from the classroom and wonders what Woban thinks he is doing to the students. In the garden of the Rodland Academy, a medical herbalism class is in full swing. Andreas walks over and looks questioningly at what's going on. All the students are actively engaged in something. No one is just sitting there. The students are hurriedly brewing something, pouring it from test tube to flask. Andreas is completely bewildered. He doesn't understand why everyone is in such a hurry. One of the students is holding his head in annoyance. He is yelling that this is wrong too. What did he just do? He's not getting anywhere. Andreas looks at everything with a nonchalant expression on his face. He wonders why everything that is happening looks like an exam. Suddenly, behind him, he hears the professor come up to him and say affirmatively that he is late. Andreas looks away indifferently. Andreas's indignation is unbounded. He can barely contain himself from saying something back to the professor, and he continues to say with a smile that it seems that Andreas was so busy with his own research that he didn't even see the notification from him in his tablet. Suddenly, someone grabs Andreas hard by his robe. He turns around questioningly. He sees that Lucia has grabbed him and is urging him somewhere, telling him to go with her, and she will explain everything to him. The professor standing next to Andreas chuckles gloatingly, covering his mouth with his hand. Lucia shows him something on her tablet. She reproachfully tells Andreas to just buy himself a tablet already, and wonders how long she will show him her tablet. Andreas stares at her in silence. The tablet shows Professor Vauban, a smug look on his face, with a large flask of some kind of potion next to him. It says that he invented the awakening potion, and he got the idea to make an exam out of analyzing this potion. Andreas gets down to the task at hand. He puzzledly picks up the utensils he needs. He is convinced that the professor just felt the need to show off. Professor Vauban approaches his desk and observes what he is doing. Professor Vauban coughs and asks Andreas Riley about how, for someone of his level, figuring out ingredients and proportions should be easy. He smirks. Andreas stands silently and stares at him. At this point, he thinks he really is a hard-headed asshole. His face expresses no emotion. The professor smiles slyly. He tells Andreas that today he will finally show him who he really is. At this moment, he thinks about the fact that Andreas has a very bright future ahead of him. Andreas realizes that the man has confused his words with his intentions. The expression on the professor's face instantly changes. He realizes that he blurted out the wrong thing. He angrily continues to think that Andreas has taken advantage of Miss Everlast, a rising star in the potions world. Andreas grinds the herbs in silence. His gaze is off to the side. Lucia is shocked at what is happening, her tablet in her hands as well. The weather outside is warm summer weather. There is not a single cloud in the sky. 4 hours have passed since the beginning of class. The professor looks tired, snot dripping from his nose, his pupils constricted. He looks at his clipboard and can't believe his eyes. The tablet displayed the analysis of the awakening potion's composition. According to the test results, the first place is undoubtedly Lucia Everlast. She has the fastest and most accurate result. Next is Andreas Cromwell, and in third place is Taylor Bagman. The students are crowded around the professor. He continues to look at the clipboard. One of the students assures him that there was no cheating during the exam. The professor remains silent, staring at the clipboard. One of the female students concludes that Andreas Cromwell does indeed have a talent for potions. The frustrated boy leans back against the table. He can't believe he's lost to someone like Andreas. Lucius is happy. She turns to Andreas, calling him Algae Head and telling him he's good for him. Andreas resents her addressing him. He doesn't like being called that. Suddenly, one of the students angrily calls Professor Vauban by name. Everyone turns to look at him in confusion. A fat boy, one of the students, runs up to the professor and angrily asks him why he is doing this to him. The students look puzzled at what is happening. They don't understand what he means. The professor looks at him confused. His eyes are wide, his lips tight. Andreas and Lucius stand there in complete shock. They hear the fat boy ask Professor Vauban why he passed off the potion he created as his own. The fat boy runs up to Professor Vauban. He asks him angrily, how could he do this to him? The professor, of all people, knows how much effort he put into making this potion. The professor looks at him confused. The students stand with their mouths open. They are shocked at what just happened. Some wonder if the fat boy named Harolf, who is a senior student, made a mistake. The students didn't expect a teacher to be capable of such a... Andreas watches the scene suspiciously. He is absolutely certain that Harolf is not deceiving. He asks Lucia what she thinks about it. Lucia replies, without a shred of doubt, that if we are talking about Professor Vauban, she is absolutely certain that he is capable of it. Andreas agrees with her and resolutely goes somewhere else. A furious Lucia is angry with him, trying to stop him, but he doesn't listen to her and leaves. Lucius is confused and angry with him. For a moment, she regretted saving Andreas yesterday. She decides for herself that she will not worry about him from now on. Andreas approaches them. He interrupts them and turns to the professor, asking him what ingredients he used to brew the potion. The professor angrily replies to him that this is not the time for such conversations. Andreas is confused. He explains to him that this is exactly what the situation has to do with. Andreas assures the professor that if it is his job, he can prove it right here. The professor cannot hide the fright on his face. He is angry at Andreas for trying to expose him, and soon everyone will know. The satisfied fat boy looks at Andreas with joy. There is hope in his eyes that justice will be served. He asks him what he means that there will be an examination in the magic tower. The professor stands in utter shock. Andreas says that if the professor really did create this potion, he can easily explain why he used such ingredients. The professor is utterly confused. Harolf looks at him angrily. The professor, fixing his glasses, smiles. He says it's impertinent. After all, he's a prestigious professor at Rodlin Academy. Andreas interrupts him. He asks him an even more uncomfortable question, one that he should definitely know the answer to if he brewed this potion. He asks him why he replaced the apricot smog with cytomine petals. Everyone stands with bated breath, waiting for him to answer. The professor is confused. He even flinches in surprise. Drops of sweat come to his face. He's all nervous. He's thinking about how bad it is. He was so distracted by the presentation that he forgot to clarify this point. Harolf looks at him suspiciously with his mouth open and asks him why he doesn't answer. A bird of prey sits on a tree limb not far from them and watches what is happening. It listens to their conversation. Andreas tells the professor that using petals lowers the price, and if he was creating this potion, he would know that. There are tall branching trees in the garden. The professor angrily says that only the magic tower has the right to conduct an examination. He tries to evade in every way he can. Through the thick branches of the trees, you can see a clear sky. Not a cloud is visible. Andreas asks the professor one last question. He asks why it is necessary to use the more expensive Julie beetles when he can use Papa's powder. The professor froze. He thinks about what he should answer, so as not to find himself in a stupid situation. There is dead silence between them. Andreas and Harolf are waiting for him to answer. The quiet whispers of the students began to be heard. They all stand with their mouths open. Professor Vauban swallows the saliva that comes to his throat. He doesn't know how to get out of it. Behind him, he hears students asking why he doesn't answer. The professor is ready to fall through the ground. He feels bad. The students whisper among themselves, realizing that he just stole the potion recipe from his own student and wants to pass it off as his own. Professor Vauban clenches his fist furiously. He tries to give an answer to the question Andreas asked him. He angrily yells that Daddy's powder has hallucinogenic effects. Harolf looks at him dumbfounded. Andreas is still as unfazed. The professor continues to explain loudly why he used beetles, even though they are more expensive. Harolf looks at the professor perplexed. He tells him that that's not the reason he didn't use Papa's powder. Andreas explains that the point is that the potion's brewing process heats the powder for an extended period of time, which can lead to stomach pain in the consumer. He is convinced to the end that the professor is passing off someone else's potion as his own after all. Professor Vauban waves his hands angrily. He shouts loudly, almost hysterically, that Andreas is wrong. He tries to convince him that it is definitely because of the hallucinogenic effect. Because of his nerves, he begins to stutter. The students look at him. Suddenly, Harolf remembers and talks about how Professor Vauban did tell him about the side effects of the powder, but he didn't talk about it being a hallucinogen. Professor Vauban buries himself completely. His face is overwhelmed with horror. He is asked a question to the effect that could he please explain how he arrived at this answer. Andreas turns around and sees the crowd of students pointing their fingers at him in horror. Professor Vauban pushes back in despair. He is urged to leave the academy and resign immediately. The professor grits his teeth in anger. Sweat drips from his face. He hears the insults that he is a thief and a fraud. Professor Vauban is completely out of control. He's furious. He is frothing at the mouth to prove that only Andreas and Harolf are the cheaters here, not him. His eyes are wide open. His eyebrows are furrowed, and snot is coming out of his nose. Turning to Andreas and Harolf, he points his finger at them and asks indignantly about the two of them setting this up. He threatens to bring them both before the disciplinary committee. Andreas thinks only that the professor has really hit rock bottom. The students who witnessed this event shout angrily that they should boycott the professor. Professor Vauban stands with his mouth wide open. He was taken aback by Andreas's words. He suggested that he ask Sir Alwyn to make an appointment with him where he could explain everything to him. Andreas reaches for his shirt pocket with one hand, which is under his robe. He states that it is easily possible to do so. Andreas pulls a black card out of his pocket. He speaks with a serious look about Alwyn sponsoring him. Harolf looks at him in surprise. Lucius opened his mouth wide. She marvels at the fact that Andreas is threatening with the card issued to buy materials. She's well aware that the professor might not buy it. The professor's hands begin to shake hysterically. He realizes that this is the end. Andreas asks him something is wrong. Doesn't he want to explain himself? The professor's eyes begin to twitch in psychosis. The professor's legs trembled treacherously. He could barely keep himself from falling. The evil face of Sir Alwyn, the owner of the magic tower, appears in front of his face. His mad eyes burn brightly. Harolf, Andreas, and the professor look at each other in silence. A bird of prey is still watching everything that is happening. It sees the professor falling to his knees in front of his students. He is completely crushed. His cunning plan has been figured out. Behind the bird stands the Tower Master with a serious expression on his face. All he can think about is that if Professor Vauban has caused such a commotion, he will have to pay for it. Sir Alwyn lifts his lip. He is up to something. He realizes that Andreas is indeed preoccupied with research. He resents the fact that he used his name as an argument, and it worked perfectly. The bird of prey's eyes are scrutinizing what is happening. The Tower Master thinks about the fact that Andreas knew the theory and ingredients for the awakening potion, and he might be able to discover a new cure before the end of the year. The professor starts laughing hysterically. It is his defensive reaction. Despite his hysterical laughter, tears of despair come to his eyes. His lips are tight, and he is about to burst into tears of helplessness. A huge bird of prey with large wings flies over the building. Tower Master Sir Alwyn is sure to be eagerly awaiting Andreas's cure. A bird is flying high in the sky. It is illuminated by the bright rays of the sun. When it flaps its wings, its feathers fall off. The inconspicuous Rodland Academy cafeteria building stands in a thicket of green trees. Andreas, Lucia, and Vivian are sitting at the table. There is a large variety of food in front of them. Lucia thinks about the fact that Andreas did invite her to eat together, but to think that he brought her to the Academy's dining hall. Andreas devours the brownie with gusto. After filling his mouth full of food, he asks Lucia about the fact that, why isn't she eating? Lucia replies with a freak out that she will eat. She grabs a piece of meat with her hand and shrieks. She takes hold of her burnt hand with her other hand and cries out that she is hot. The students nearby look on in horror. Andreas and Vivian look at Lucia nonchalantly and continue eating. The piece of meat that Lucia picked up with her hand flies off. Andreas addresses Lucia reproachfully, calling her a rich lady, and says it is done like this. He carefully takes a piece of meat by the bone with 2 fingers so as not to burn himself. He dips a piece of meat into the yellow sauce, the meat squelching. It looks very appetizing. Andreas brings a piece of meat right up to Lucia's face and tells her to take it. Lucia, annoyed, asks him, what does it matter that she is rich? Lucia looks with interest at a piece of meat dipped in yellow sauce and realizes that, it turns out, it can be pretty great to eat in the dining hall. Vivian watches intently as Lucia takes a piece of meat and sauce from Andreas's hand. She chews something as she does so. Suddenly, Vivian tells Andreas that she has to go too. Lucia stares at her without turning her head. She chews the piece of meat Andreas has given her. Andreas doesn't immediately realize what she means and looks at her questioningly. Vivian points his finger at the piece of meat he has just dipped in sauce and handed to Lucia. Lucia continues to eat without raising her face. Andreas wasn't expecting that. A little surprised, he pressed his lips together. Realizing what's going on, an enigmatic smile appears on his face. They're sitting in the dining hall at Rodland Academy. It's starting to get late in the evening. Andreas dips a piece of meat in the sauce and holds it out to Vivian in the same way. They walk down a long corridor. Lucia approaches Andreas with a question about when he's going to buy himself a tablet. She convinces him that if he had one, he would receive notification of events like today's and wouldn't miss it. Andreas replies, slightly annoyed, that he is just saving up for it now. Lucius replies that it's not that expensive. Vivian walks silently beside him, thinking about something. Andreas looks at Lucia judgmentally and says that nothing is expensive for a rich girl like her. Vivian, not listening to the conversation, thinks only of the fact that Mr. Fairy gave her meat. The thought makes her smile embarrassedly. Vivian turns to Andreas and asks him if he wants to take her reward as well. She calls him Mr. Fairy. Andreas turns his face away indignantly and tells her she shouldn't do that. Lucia looks at him questioningly and wonders why Mr. Fairy. Andreas dares to look directly at Vivian about that. Why does she call him that? Without waiting for an answer, Andreas points to the hallway and says he went that way. Lucia hurries out of surprise and talks about seeing them later. Andreas looks at Vivian and says goodbye to her. Andreas moves away from the girls. Lucia and Vivian walk silently in the same direction. Andreas walks down the hallway. Sunlight streams through the tall windows, illuminating the entire corridor. From the bright light of the sun streaming through the window, Andreas involuntarily squints his eyes. Walking down the corridor, Andreas notices someone's familiar silhouette in the distance. In this silhouette, Andreas peers at Karen. His expression is calm and betrays no emotion. Andreas looks at him intently and realizes that he's finally back. Heron stares silently into Andreas's eyes. He scrutinizes him carefully. As they pass each other so as not to be seen, Andreas tells him that he sees that Heron has returned from his trip. Heron angrily tells him to come to the lab at noon tomorrow. Heron walks past Andreas without stopping. They pretend not to know each other. Andreas turns to the professor and says that he has understood everything and will come tomorrow. Andreas turns to the professor and says that he has understood everything and that he will definitely come tomorrow. Andreas smiles slyly. He is satisfied that everything is working out just fine. The meeting with Heron came at just the right time. On the grounds of the Rodlin Academy is the Rue des Alvenes. There stands an ancient forge where the finest metal in the world is forged. Andreas comes to this forge to choose the best sword for himself. He reflects on the fact that Karen is the kind of man who believes that everything he has belongs to him. He has no doubt that he will try to take the page of idleness from him by force. Andreas has decided on this sword. He points it out to the seller, convinced of his choice. The seller asks him if he would also like a sharpening stone to accompany the sword. Suddenly, a woman's voice calls out to Andreas from behind. He turns slightly and sees Diane standing behind him. She looks at him wide-eyed, holding a box wrapped in a red bow. It most likely contains a sword. She asks Andreas what he is doing at the blacksmith shop. Andreas bows his head slightly and tells her that he needs a sword. Diane looks at him puzzled and doesn't understand why he needs it, since he's a mage. Andreas stands looking at her with a nonchalant gaze. He tries not to attract attention and hopes she won't ask any more questions. He answers indifferently that one sword is useful to carry for self-defense. Andreas notices the box that Diane is holding. She understands his question without words and says that it is a gift for her brother. Andreas immediately thinks of Diane's brother, Carlos Alvin. His face is focused. He recalls his face as they sometimes bullied Diane as a child, and she indignantly screamed at them to get off her back. Carlos Alvin is the eldest son of House Alvin. He set out to become a warrior. They got along well with him as children. The image of Carlos Alvin stands before him. He is a handsome young man with long hair and a ponytail. He smiles and has a good-natured face. Andreas thinks about the fact that he is already dead by the time the game starts, so he is not part of the game's plot. Andreas recalls with a serious look that if he's not mistaken, Carlos died at events later in the year. After Hazar escaped from Count Ballarica's territory, Carlos joined a religious cult. The cult of Zephyro is the same cult that organized the terrorist attack. Suddenly, Andreas interrupts his musings and asks Dian about Carlos also participating in the end-of-year events. Dian answers him slightly confused that yes, he is. Andreas remembers how good they were together as children. He sees a picture of the three of them, Carlos, Andreas, and Diane, on a hill. Immersed in these warm memories, Andreas says that it would be nice to meet again, just the three of them. Diane can't believe his words. She stares at him mesmerized, keeping her eyes on him. She is pleased to hear it. Suddenly, she remembers something saying that he's been working out hard, someone saying he's been getting good grades in his studies lately. But she's not sure he's been able to change. She thinks about how she should ask him. She calms herself down and assures herself that she should just go ahead and ask. Andreas looks at her questioningly. His steel sword, decorated with a bow, is already in his hands. Andreas looks at Dian suspiciously and asks her about something she wants to say. Dian flinches in surprise, her eyes wide open. She cries out that she doesn't. Andreas bows his head slightly and tells Dian that they will see each other later. Diane can't find the words to reply and just stares at him silently. Andreas turns his back to her and walks away. Diane stands frustrated, trying to ask him something, but unable to make up her mind. Finally, she makes up her mind and turns around to ask Andreas a question. She gets frustrated. For just then, a door slammed sharply shut. He didn't hear her. She stands sadly looking at the door of the forge. The vendor standing behind her is puzzled as to what is going on. Andreas walks out of the forge. After thinking a little about Carlos, he remembers that there is still a little time before the terrorist attack. It is a clear, sunny day outside. There is not a cloud in the sky. A dark night has come. No light could be seen in the windows of the Teacher's Department of Academia Rodlin. Andreas sits across from Heron in complete darkness. Heron holds a book in his hands and informs Andreas that he has searched all over the continent for material of the same quality as Angela, but so far has been unable to find anything. Andreas sits silently on the couch. Andreas sits and stares sidelong, fingers folded. The new sword lies beside him. He hears Karen tell him that he plans to keep searching. Karen flips through the red book and looks in it. He tells Andreas that his hopes are not too high, but he needs material for the congregation this weekend. His face is puzzled. Andreas continues to stare intently at Heron. He realizes that this is where the game begins. If greed clouds his eyes and he asks him to give it to him, then Andreas has won. Karen slams the book shut and tells Andreas that they will now be busy in the near future and tells him to get ready. Andreas turns to the teacher and tells him that he would like to talk to him about something. Charon tensed, his lips tightening. He asked him what he wanted to talk about. Andreas tries to find the words. He does not succeed the first time. He tells his teacher that he has managed to get a part of the Apocalypse manuscript. Charon stares at him dumbfounded, unable to believe his words, his pupils narrowed. Andreas looks questioningly at Heron. He waits for any reaction from him. Professor Heron clears his throat, trying to hide his laughter. A wry smile is visible on his face. He furiously tells him that he was not talking nonsense, because it is impossible for someone like him to fall into his hands. Unexpectedly for him, a blue magic vortex forms near Andreas. Andreas cautiously puts his hand in there and tells the teacher that he can't handle something like that. Professor Heron stares at the scene wide-eyed. Andreas pulls out a golden magic cube from a glowing funnel. The magical light from the cube illuminates the professor's eyes. He can't believe what he sees.